Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Phil with the Movies. I'm your host, Phil Walsh, and coming to your galaxy today is episode number 109 of this ongoing podcast series that is for the love of movies. Today, in honor of May the 4th, though technically this episode is dropping one day before the celebratory Star Wars Day, I'm happy to be talking some Star Wars and ranking this incredible and frankly legendary saga. But I'm not alone today, and in the words of Yoda, there is another. And I'm delighted to be welcoming back to the show Nolan Ryan. Nolan has been on the show before, been a couple of collaborations in the past. He hosts the Never Split Up podcast. And if you love horror movies, anything horror related in terms of cinema, slashers, I mean, these guys, him and Anthony, they cover it all. Absolutely two outstanding gentlemen. And I'm glad to have him back on, or have Nolan back, because he's a little bit of a Star Wars fan, if you couldn't guess, based on the Darth Vader mask in the corner. But Nolan, if you want to give a plug about your show and talk about what you guys got going on over on the Never Split Up podcast.
Of course. Thanks so much, Phil, for having me on and allowing me to do this little bit of a crossover. As you said, I host a horror podcast, but I am a huge Star Wars nerd. So I believe when we first got together and you came on our podcast, we were talking all things Halloween, which you love. And I had mentioned to you, please, if you have any Star Wars episodes coming in the pipeline, if you could consider me. So I'm really grateful to be on here. So thank you for letting me talk about one of my favorite franchises of all time. But yes, Never Split Up podcast. We have been running that for about a year and a half now. And we just recently put out our 50th episode. So that was a pretty big milestone for us. So if you guys are into horror, we have a great time over there. Me and my best friend, Anthony, we've been friends our whole lives. So we have some good banter. We keep it light and fun when talking about these movies. It's great, especially when we disagree, because you can really see our friendship come out in that. And yeah, we have a lot of fun. So check out our 50th episode. It's a big one. We are ranking our top 10 modern horror villains. So those are all villains post 2000. We already covered our classic villains list. That was last year. So if you guys want to be brought up to speed on that, definitely check that out. And yeah, thank you so much, Phil. I'm excited to dive into these rankings and talk all things Star Wars. This should get pretty fun, I think.
Oh yeah, this is where the fun begins
Exactly.
to drop
Yep.
another Star Wars line. I mean, fair warning, everyone. There's going to be a lot of Star Wars puns and lines dropped, I'm sure, throughout the course of today's episode. So, strap in, because it's going to be a fun one. Nolan, before we begin with the rankings, just a quick question for you. What is your Star Wars story? How did you first become acquainted with this galaxy far, far away?
I'm really glad you asked, because I grew up with, obviously, like most fans, grew up with this franchise. I had an older brother. He was 8 years older than me. So I was born in the early 90s, so I'm a 90s kid. The prequel movies, obviously, I'm nostalgic for. I remember going to the midnight premieres with my brother and seeing those movies. I'm sure, as all people in their early 30s remember. I mean, I was the prime age for those movies, but I'm unique because I consider myself growing up on the original trilogy, because I was watching those movies since I was like 4 or 5 years old with my older brother. So while I am nostalgic for the prequels, I'm also nostalgic for the original trilogy. I mean, I obviously didn't see them in theaters, but growing up watching them with my brother and sharing that bond with him is something special to me. So I feel like I'm unique in that try to be a little bit more unbiased than some people who maybe saw the Phantom Menace when was their first experience. Um, so yeah, if you were to ask me what Star Wars means to me, it means sitting on the couch with my brother and watching the original trilogy and watching A New Hope and Empire and Return of the Jedi, and then also going to see the prequels. I will vividly always remember seeing Revenge of the Sith, the midnight premiere, back when we still had midnight premieres.
Mm.
Waiting in line outside the theater, everyone was dressed up and cosplaying. It was incredible. That's what I think of when I think of Star Wars. I think of when I went to Disney World last year and going to Galaxy's Edge and seeing fathers. I'm a new father. I just had a baby, so seeing fathers with their kids, running around and enjoying the sequels, because that's their generation and stuff. So um, I in preparation for this episode, I watched a few of your Star Wars specials on this podcast, and those episodes where you had your sister Jen on were incredible. Just hearing your guys' stories, and sharing Star Wars together. That's really what makes Star Wars so special to me and to everyone. It's just stood this test of time, and it's I love it, man. It's great. I can't wait to talk this franchise with you.
I'll co-sign everything you've said there. I got a lot of wear and tear on this a particular videotape growing up. Yeah, the original trilogy. It was sort of interesting to grow up in a world where Star Wars was everywhere. It wasn't like seeing these movies for the first time in the late 70s and early 80s. When we came of age, Star Wars was everywhere, and then of course it went into even overdrive with the prequels and the special editions, and now with everything on Disney Plus or the new films. It's really a remarkable franchise, but certainly, like and I have a special place in my heart for the original trilogy because that's what I grew up on. I wore out all of those tapes. I saw the special editions when they were released in '97. That was a great experience. I remember going to see The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and of course, Revenge of the Sith. On a healthy number of times back in 2005. But nevertheless, Star Wars has been a part of my movie going life, and frankly, it's been something that I've bonded with, not just my younger sister, but my middle sister as well. So it's been a family event, I guess is probably the way to say it. There's something about Star Wars and family at all. The
Yeah.
circle is complete, if you will. But yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about these films with you and hearing what your rankings are because again, I have not seen Nolan's. Nolan has not seen mine. So again, this is all spur of the moment, if you will. And again, I have to put up this disclaimer because, God knows how everybody is today. These are our opinions. This is not meant to be law or objective. They are merely opinions. They're just movies, everybody. Like, let's all put down the lightsabers and just have a good time. So that's the disclaimer I feel I have to put out today that, these are our opinions. We're not speaking for anybody else. It's just we're all having fun here. But all right, so we'll start. We'll be 11 all the way to 1. We're going to rank the Star Wars, the Skywalker saga, as well as the two Disney solo films that came out in between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. So it's going to be a lot of Star Wars, specifically the theatrical editions, if you will. But Nolan, since you are the guest, I will have you go first. So, in the words of Emperor Palpatine, do it.
Okay, here we go. That's
All right.
that's really cool to hear. So we have a pretty similar upbringing with Star Wars. We
Yeah.
grew up on the original, and then we saw the prequels in theaters. So I'm excited to see our list. Okay, so just I have to do this disclaimer as well. I'm a nerd for Star Wars. I love pretty much all Star Wars. So even though I have these movies ranked, and you're going to see what's at the bottom of my rankings, I still enjoy all Star Wars. I thoroughly enjoy all of the movies that we're about to talk about, except this last movie that I have at number 11. And this is a controversial one, but my least favorite is Episode 8, The Last Jedi. I, I mean, there's so many points to touch on with this movie, and it's been talked to death on social media. I'm I see. I don't even know where to start. I enjoy and think that the movie's overall concepts and themes could have worked. It's when they get into it, and I guess the execution of it, that is just handled so terribly. Especially, coming off the heels of the Force Awakens, we didn't have a Luke Skywalker. The build up to Luke in that movie, you finally see him at the end, and we'll obviously get to that movie when we get to it on our rankings. But the way they handled Luke, I just it's almost insulting, and I get what they were trying to go with, but I just think it was handled so poorly, and the fact that it was so jarring. Like we didn't get Luke before the Last Jedi, at least in terms of the theatrical movies. We get, you know, Return of the Jedi back in the '80s. We finally see him again now that Disney has acquired Star Wars, and this is what they give us, and it's just it still doesn't sit right with me, and that's just one of the problems with the movie that I have. The parallel stories that are going on, I'm not a fan of. Listen, if you were to give me, Benicio del Toro in a movie called Casino Night, a Star Wars story, like that would be incredible. I would sign up for that. But him being kind of shoehorned into the story, that whole side story, I mean, it's fine, but it just takes away too much from the Skywalker narrative. I mean, it's the return of Luke, and I wanted to see more Luke. That I'm just gonna say I call it the Leah Poppins scene. I think I literally rolled my eyes in the theater. Again, not because I don't want Leia to have the Force. Like I understand she's a Skywalker and she has the Force, but that would have been such a better moment, especially with the tragic passing of Carrie Fisher. It's pretty ironic that she lasts longer than Luke and Han in these movies when Carrie Fisher unfortunately passed away in real life. They bring her all the way to Rise of Skywalker, which is fine, but that moment I can't get on board with. Little moments like Admiral Akbar, what's her name, Holdo stealing the spotlight from Akbar and ramming the ship into the First Order ship. That should have been Akbar doing that, dude. I don't know how you feel about that, but I was really disappointed. He should have went out that way. Now there were things that I did like about it. Like I said, the overall concepts, if they were executed right, were okay. I actually believe that Ray should have been a nobody. I think that was a great
Thank
plot
you.
point. Um, and I know you agree with me because I heard you touch on this in some of your previous episodes. I think that would have been a great way to usher in the new generation, and especially now that we're getting more Ray movies post Skywalker saga. It's like, well, she's a Skywalker. Is it really not the Skywalker saga anymore? It's kind of confusing there. So I think it would have been fine if she was a nobody, and the whole concept that anyone can be, the chosen one and have these great powers is really cool. Um, Luke's fight with Kylo towards the end on that planet, I forget the planet's name, but was incredible. That was definitely an oh my god moment when he's
Mm.
just dodging everything, and he obviously succumbs to his quote unquote force wounds and he joins the force, but you know, whatever. There are some high points. The fight scene with Snoke when they kill Snoke is pretty cool overall, but I just every time I go back and I do a binge of this franchise and I get to this movie, I'm like, as soon as I hit play, I'm like, all right, here we go, because I have to get through it because I'm a completionist, but it's tough, man. And it's been a little while now. It was released several years ago, and I still really haven't come to terms with it. And I'm sorry if this was long winded, but this is one of the ones I feel pretty strongly about. So I wanted to kind of get my point across. And again, it's just my opinion. I respect people that love the directing style and the cinematography. It was beautiful, and people that like this version of Luke. And I just can't. And then hearing Mark Hamill's comments afterwards, how he was so disappointed, it just like really is a dagger to the heart hearing that. So the Last Jedi definitely in last place for me, solidly in last place, I would say, unfortunately.
No, that's totally fair. I will save what I have to say about The Last Jedi because it comes at a different point in my
Okay,
list.
great.
But
Yeah.
no, I mean a lot of what you said, I co-sign and totally understand. Um, it's a divisive movie, and I mean we're still obviously talking about it now.
Yeah.
What is it now? Almost 8 years later. So it definitely strikes a chord with folks. I can say this: there has never been a Star Wars movie like The Last Jedi, and I don't think we'll ever see one like it again. I think it
Yeah.
really covers all those bases. But okay, I'll begin with my number 11. And this I know will probably shock a few people. But again, disclaimer was put out at the beginning of the episode. For me, number 11 is The Rise of Skywalker.
Okay.
And you talk about a film that when I first saw this back in 2019, I was very pleased with it, particularly coming after The Last Jedi and sort of tying together all of the threads from the sequel trilogy. I thought it was as good as you were going to get, if you will, with everything that had come before. So I was very receptive to the film. But as the years have gone on, this movie has, and you'll pardon the expression, everybody, it has aged like blue milk in the two suns. Um, the problem with this film, I mean, there's a number of issues. We'll just get to the elephant in the room. The return of Palpatine, while I like that Sidious is the ultimate bad guy. I think there's something poetic about that. His return, I think, is poorly handled. I know there's a lot of retconning now and rewrites and trying to, you know, say this was all part of the plan from the beginning. But if we're just looking in the context of those two other films, and that's all we had at the time, was just The Force Awakens and the Last Jedi. There is no conceivable way that I can see how the return of Palpatine was at all part of the plan. It feels like a desperate Hail Mary to bring back the ultimate bad guy to try to get butts in the seats, so to speak, for the last film. Again, always great to see Ian McDiarmid back because, I mean, he never turns in a bad performance, I believe, as the Emperor. He's just, I mean, he is Sidious. He just always is on point. But his return, I thought, was poorly handled. There was no setup, and therefore there was no payoff. And ultimately his defeat I thought was the epitome of anticlimactic. Again, if you're going to bring back the ultimate Sith Lord, at least have him go out, in style, so to speak, not just have his face melted, a la Raiders of the Lost Ark with lightning. But that's all an aside. My other issue with this film, or other issues, I should say, it tries too hard to be both a sequel to The Last Jedi and by extension, The Force Awakens. And it feels like it's trying to be and do so many things, but ultimately accomplishes nothing. I really liked the fact that Rey was a nobody in The Last Jedi. I thought that was a perfect setup for where this series could go and where the story could end. And that is all rewritten, retcon to no, she's really a Palpatine. And then by the end of it, she becomes a Skywalker. I thought that was sort of a cheap and again, more of a crowd pleasing moment or an attempt to crowd please. And on top of that, it, you have some themes and ideas that are explored in The Last Jedi that I thought, let's see where these threads go, particularly with Kylo Ren, the Rey dynamic, even where the rebellion finds or the resistance finds itself at the end of the film. And none of that is explored. It's a rehash, a remake, whatever you want to call it, I feel, of Return of the Jedi, and not done with any kind of style or panache, if you will. That's an issue I kind of have with The Force Awakens, which I certainly enjoy more than The Rise of Skywalker, but that at points feels like a soft remake of A New Hope. But in that one, it feels a little bit more organic. This just feels like, all right, we're going to try to remake Return of the Jedi circa 2019. And I don't know, even some of the quote unquote, fan moments like Luke lifting the X-wing. Yeah, it was great. There was a bit of a reaction from the audience, I remember, but it was again, as time has gone on, it just feels like, all right, let's plug in this moment. Let's plug in, Palpatine saying, "Do it." Let's throw back to the Plagueis lines. I mean, like it just felt like a checklist of all the other Star Wars movies. Now, I know people are going to say, "Oh, well, hey, George Lucas said it always rhymes." And look, I will concede that if you want, but I think there's a difference between sort of repetition and just sort of a natural organic flow of the story. And so sort of to tie it all together, I think it's a rather disappointing conclusion to not only the trilogy of sequels, but of the entire saga. This is meant to tie up 9 films, and like I said, I think it tries to be so many different things, and it ultimately goes nowhere and pleases nobody. And again, I don't want to get off on a tangent about how Finn was treated as a character, but I thought that was a real disservice to his character. Again, we're sort of teased this whole potential storyline of him maybe being a Force user, but then it never goes anywhere. So it's like, okay, well, what was the point of that? Again, he had a great storyline going back to the Force Awakens, and that again, I felt like had no ultimate payoff. So again, if you love this film, great. I know a lot of people have strong feelings one way or the other about it, but to me, it it has not aged well in the now what 4 or 5 years since it was released. And again, every time I have gone back to revisit it, which has not been many, I will say that I find myself self saying, "Wow, this is really disappointing." Like this could have been so much more. It could have been so much better. I mean, I hesitate to almost use that word, but it's it's a mixed bag. And even by the end of it, with Luke and Leia appearing as Force Ghosts, like yeah, it's a sweet moment, but again, it sort of feels like a copy and paste moment from Return of the Jedi. Like there's nothing that makes it feel like this is a natural progression of the story. It's like, what do we think people like about Star Wars, and let's just all put it into one final movie and throw it at the wall and see if it sticks. And for me, while I was, I think, more receptive to it when it first came out, I think it was more just the kind of the awe of it not being like what we had previously seen with The Last Jedi, which was extremely divisive and I mean, I'll just say it at the top, was disappointing when it first came out. The Rise of Skywalker just unfortunately continues to sink lower and lower for me. Where it's to the point now, like I I don't have an interest to revisit it at all. Just, outside of maybe ahead of this episode, I reviewed a few clips and whatnot from some scenes in the movie, but that's been the extent of it for me. So number 11 is The Rise of Skywalker.
Okay, so we had different movies, but we kind of feel similarly about our last place, how it's kind of just we're growing to not like it more and more as time goes on. I feel the same way about The Last Jedi as you do with The Rise of Skywalker. So okay, I'll save my thoughts
Yeah, 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 please, yeah.
because number 10 is not The Rise of Skywalker. At number 10, I have, and again, I enjoy, this is from now here on out, I enjoy all these movies. So, I'm going to be talking about nitpicks and little stuff I like, but I enjoy all of Star Wars, guys. But number
Probably
10
fair.
for me is Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. I just feel like this is a fun movie in itself, but part of why the prequels are so heavily scrutinized is because of the Phantom Menace. This movie did not. I'm on board with the people that say it really did not need to be made. This could have been told in flashback sequences during a different story when Anakin is older. I just think that they opened themselves up for scrutiny by creating an entire movie around them discovering Anakin on Tatooine. I think if they would have just compartmentalized it within the trilogy and shown more of Anakin's rise through the Order, it would have been much more well received. But I still enjoy the movie. It's disappointing that we get this and we get no Clone Wars in any 3 movie. I mean, you hear the Clone Wars in the New Hope, and you're like, what the hell is that? Wait, what did he just say? The Clone Wars? And it's one of the things that I'm sure, I mean, I was a kid, so I wasn't thinking this way, but I'm sure older Star Wars fans that saw the original trilogy in theaters and grew up with the franchise were excited to see, the Clone Wars. They were excited to see the downfall of Vader and the Clone Wars. That was probably the 2 biggest things. So I think this movie is the reason we don't get the Clone Wars, because after this movie is told, we now have to fast forward through a lot of stuff to get to Vader's downfall in 2 movies, and everything was rushed because of it. So I kind of use this as a scapegoat, if you will. Maybe it's a little unfair, but I still enjoy this movie. Like I said, I've come to terms with it. I love Qui Gon Jinn. Obviously, Darth Maul is incredible. the characters that pretty much throughout the entire prequel, I would say the strength of the prequel movies is its introduction to many characters. I think all of the characters, although a lot of them short-lived and not touched on as much, are fantastic. And we'll get into, Count Dooku and General
Mhm.
Grievous and stuff. I think that's the prequel's strength, is introducing its villains in particular. I'm a villain guy, so I love all the many different villains in the prequels. But yeah, I just every time I watch this movie, I think of what could have been with the prequel trilogy, and this movie is the reason that I just think that it's not as good as it could have been. So it ends up at number 10, but I still have a good enough time with it.
Totally fair, man. Again, I'll save my thoughts on the Phantom Menace because it's at another point in the list. But no, it certainly, you make a valid point about it. It is not the film that I think people expected it to be. I mean, when they announced they were doing the prequels, I mean, and, granted, I was sort of in that stage where it's like, oh, Star Wars is coming, and that's all that sort of mattered. But I can understand how this movie would have been an extreme shock, if you will, just given what had preceded it with the other three, and certainly it's one of those films that it generates a lot of discussion now, 25 years later. Not probably not as quite as much as The Last Jedi, but in a different way, I guess is probably the way to say it with the Phantom Menace. But yeah, I'll save my thoughts on that for a little bit later on because well, we'll wait till we get to it. All right, so number 10. This one I know is going to upset a lot of people, but
Oh,
that's okay. That's what this is all about. It's about a list. So number 10 for me is The Force Awakens. And
wow. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
so sort of sort of call back to my comments on the rise of Skywalker. There are moments in this film where it does feel a little bit derivative. It feels a little repetitive, like we're just sort of updating A New Hope for the next generation. But at the same time, there is an organic flow to the story, so I can kind of excuse any repetition or moments that feel familiar because again to draw on George Lucas for a moment, everything rhymes. It's like poetry or whatever the full quote is that he says. Um, this is the film that I think that Star Wars fans particularly needed in 2015, especially after the prequel trilogy, which at the time it was still rather divisive. I think that has changed in recent years, but The Force Awakens sort of bridged the divide and it made Star Wars cool again. Everybody was on the same side of the table. And for that, I think the film is a masterclass. It's a safe movie. It doesn't take a lot of chances necessarily. There are some which I'll get to in a moment, but it all in all tries to be a crowd pleasing, just make everybody happy. This is Star Wars. We got the Millennium Falcon, we've got Chewie, we've got Han, 3POs, everybody's there. We've got some new characters, but there's sort of the similar uh, archetypes or callbacks to the originals. So again, everything sort of feels new, but there's that hint of nostalgia, which was so important back in the mid 2010s and certainly for a few years after the fact. But on that point, my issue with this film is that it does tend to play it a little too safe. Probably the boldest move they have in the film, outside of keeping Luke, uh, hidden, if you will, or not seen until literally 2 minutes before the film ends, is of course, and again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but I imagine if you're listening to this episode, you have seen all of these films. The death of Han Solo. That was a bold moment. Certainly, Harrison Ford had his thoughts on where Han should have ended up during Return of the Jedi, but that was a bold moment, and I applaud them for that. Again, I might quibble on the execution of it and just in terms of the story and whatnot, and was it really necessary? But in terms of being a shock moment, I mean, that was a moment I can remember the audience that I was with opening night. people were saying, no, there's no way they're going to do it. There's no way they're going to do it. And of course, they do it. And it's one of those moments that stays etched in your mind with that movie. So I applaud them for that. But it's again, it's not quite to the extent of the Force, the Rise of Skywalker, which feels to me a total copy and paste from Return of the Jedi. But there's a lot of moments in the Force Awakens that tend to, I say to myself, okay, we've seen this before. Now it's maybe a little more updated. You've got the cantina scene, which is a famous moment from the original trilogy. You have basically an updated version of that with Maz Kanata's castle, when they go to that planet with all the green, if you will. And again, it's not like it's sort of in your face because there's enough peppered throughout the movie that sort of differentiates it. But again, this is another one where as I've gone back to revisit it, I find myself feeling like, okay, it's fun, it's entertaining. Again, the dynamics between Rey and Finn are some of the best moments of the entire film, and frankly of that entire trilogy. We've got a cool introduction to Darth Vader's grandson, Kylo Ren. Uh, Easily one of the best parts of the entire trilogy, as far as I'm concerned, played by Adam Driver. So again, there's enough there that I can enjoy, and certainly, if I'm looking for just a straightforward, kind of just no frills. Like it's just a fun popcorn. I mean, all the Star Wars films are popcorn films. I don't mean that, but just more of a, all right, just gonna pop in The Force Awakens, or I hesitate even saying this, but like a movie if I'm doing work and I want something on the background. This is kind of one of those movies where I feel like, all right, it's sort of you can kind of do a little bit of work and check in at various scenes and whatnot. But again, it's not that it's a bad movie, because like I said, it's a movie that the fans, and frankly I think just sort of the general movie audience, needed in 2015, because it made Star Wars relevant again. But sort of looking back, it does play it a little safe at points, and there are some moments in terms of the story that I just sort of have to question. Like, I mean, what's done is done, but the fact that you had Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, and Mark Hamill all back for a Star Wars film, and the three of them don't share a single scene together, it just never will make any sense to me. I mean, putting it, I just don't understand how when you're making a story like that, you don't think, okay, how can we at least get Han, Luke, and Leia together again for one more time on screen? I feel that was a major missed opportunity, because obviously, now it can happen, but just in the terms of the story itself, it was never an option, obviously, with the death of Han. But again, it's a fun movie. It's not that I have an issue with it in the same way as The Rise of Skywalker, but it I think looking back, I would rather have had something in many ways that kind of went the prequel route, which was it wanted to be different. It went out of its way to tell a different kind of story and took more risk and chances. I think if the film had done more stuff like, say with the death of Han, I think you could have had more interesting doors to open up, and directions the story could go, instead of just being, all right, let's just buckle in and try to get everybody back to see Star Wars again, and play it safe. I mean, again, you can't argue with the results. It was a hugely successful movie, but I think in terms of story and sort of creative avenues, I would have preferred to see something a little bit more interesting and not so repetitive, if you will. So number 10 is The Force Awakens for me. I know that again will probably shock some people, because it is certainly many people's favorite, or one of many favorites among the saga. But again, Star Wars is very, very near and dear to my heart. So this is it pains me to put it where it is, and I looked at it, I was like, boy, is that really fair to The Force Awakens? But I said, I got to hold to
Yeah.
to my guns, because everything else that comes afterward, it's sort of like with what you said, Nolan, like everything after this movie, I like it's truly all coming from a place of love and reverence. So There we go. Number 10.
I know what you're saying because these lists get crowded, man. I mean, I felt bad about some of my rankings of these movies, but I just couldn't justify putting them higher because
Yeah.
there are so many great movies, especially when you get into the upper tiers of these
Bingo.
rankings. So, you know, I this movie is a little bit higher up for me, so I'll save most of my comments. The only thing I'll say is, and I know what you're saying. It was total nostalgia bait. They played it safe, but call me a sucker, man, because in the theater I was eating this shit up. I was loving it, and I still enjoy this movie. So yeah, I'll talk about that in a
No,
little bit.
totally
So
fair. Totally
we
fair.
will continue along here. We're on number 9 now,
Number 9.
and number 9 for me is going to be The Rise of Skywalker.
Mm,
So kind of opposite for you actually. I left the theater feeling very disappointed, especially the biggest problems I have are in the third act and are especially the very end of the movie. I mean, Ben and Ray's kiss just still doesn't make sense to me. It was so forced, I feel like. And then the whole line, I'm a Skywalker, just like like you said, it's almost like they were trying to save face and just make Skywalker relevant again. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish there, but I didn't like that. So I definitely had a bad taste in my mouth leaving the theater for this movie. And like you said, it being the conclusion to the Skywalker saga is pretty disappointing. But I will say it is number 9 because it has grown on me a bit, and a lot of your points are valid, but I just like the overall aesthetic of the movie. We talked before. I mean, I run a horror movie podcast. I love how dark and just sombering this movie is. Exegol is amazing, and it's so creepy. Seeing Sidious and all of his little puppets and servants, and seeing the clones in the tanks was so creepy. So I love that that's in Star Wars in general. We could talk about the execution, but I'm just talking about overall aesthetics. I
mhm.
do like the darkness to this movie, and you can say it's because they were kind of copying Return of the Jedi, but I think it takes it to another level. I think Return of the Jedi was a little bit more sombering, especially with Luke and stuff. He was kind of, you know, coming off the heels of finding out about Vader and his father, and it was kind of a little bit more toned down. It wasn't really like creepy and dark like this one is.
Mhm.
So I really enjoy that about this movie. Um, I look to Disney and I blame Disney for this entire mess, and particularly this movie. I mean, to buy the rights to this franchise, I mean, I believe they paid billions of dollars to get the rights to these movies, and then then to not write a cohesive script ahead of time
Bingo.
and plan out the trilogy. And they gave The Force Awakens to J.J. Abrams. They said, have fun, we trust you. He makes his movie, and then they just do a complete pivot. They hand it off to Rian Johnson, who I believe wrote The Last Jedi as well as directed
Mhm.
it. He helped write it, takes it in a different direction, and now they bring back J.J. Abrams. It almost would have been better if they just did a third director and just doubled down on it, because now J.J. Abrams has to kind of piecemeal this movie together. And I'm not excusing him because
No.
it's not a great movie, but I am kind of giving him a little bit of a pass because I think the main villain is Disney in this, and is the executive producers for not having the foresight to really write a cohesive script for 3 movies. Um, yeah, I feel like you said with The Force Awakens, how you can just throw it on when you're doing other stuff. That's how I kind of feel about this movie. Like I said, the whole creepiness of it and the dark tones. I love Ray in this movie. I think this is one of Ray's, if not her best movie. I think Daisy Ridley does a fine job. C3PO is awesome. He
Yeah.
is great. He has some really good moments in this movie, which is awesome. Yeah, I do enjoy this movie quite a bit more than when I first saw it in theaters, despite all of its flaws. Like I said, the ending is just I almost look away, but the rest of the movie I'm fine with it. I have a good time with it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point because I will never understand why there wasn't a coherent story from seven to nine. I know
Yeah,
people like to counter that with say, well, George Lucas didn't have everything figured out. And fair to an extent, but I think it's an easier justification when it's one person who's behind
it's his baby.
everything.
Yeah,
Exactly. So he kind of, it's God in a way of the Star Wars
yeah,
universe. He can kind of figure it out as he goes because he's created it. But when you're dealing with an institution, and that's what Star Wars is at this point, and you don't have a roadmap, it does show. And I think it does tend to show itself the most in this film, where
yeah.
again, decisions were made. It does have that Hail Mary like quality to it. I've always been curious what would have happened had they gone in the direction with Colin Trevorrow. And I don't know if you've ever read or seen excerpts from his script and the story outlines.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's worth a look because it is a tonally different movie than what The Rise of Skywalker was. I think the proposed title was called Duel of Fates, which there's something kind of interesting and symbolic about that. It definitely feels more like a follow-up to The Last Jedi in a way. I think one of the big carryovers was Rey being a nobody. That was followed through to the end, but it felt like it would have been a more conclusive chapter, not just to the trilogy, but to the entire six other films. I mean, again, it's neither here nor there because we got what we got, but it's just sort of a fascinating what if. And again, there's no guarantee that that film would have been any less, divisive or more uniting. Who knows? But yeah, it's a fascinating ending, I guess is what I would say. I mean,
It's
I
an ending.
it's an ending. That's what it's an ending. Like, there's moments in there that I can certainly get behind. Like again, anything with Sidious is always going to be great. I think you make a good point about the creep factor. He is very unsettling in this film, and that's actually like, even though I have issues with the whole lack of a full explanation of how, or frankly, why he's back, I do like the kind of mad scientist, Frankenstein vibes of Exegol. It is a creepy, uh, planet, and just the whole, with Snoke in the test tubes. It's really right out of a horror movie. And again, Sidious always plays that to a T. So those were great moments. And certainly anything with Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley. And I would even co-sign. I think this is her best film of the trilogy. She really delivers I think a solid and complex performance in this film, despite all of the issues that I have with other parts of it. But yeah, no, the Rise of Skywalker, not one that's going to be as probably divisive as The Last Jedi, but still, still garners discussion all
Oh
these
yeah.
years later. Here we are tonight. Okay, so that was your number nine. So my number nine is, and again, I had to preface this with everything, but you know, love all these films from here on out. So this is where it really got very much about, picking and choosing. But number nine for me is Solo. And this movie, I think, feels the most Star Warsy, if that makes any sense, of the Disney films. Even though this movie is void of the usual Skywalker storyline. Yes, we have Darth Maul make an appearance at the end. We do get a lightsaber showing up in a Star Wars film, so there is that little bit of connective tissue throughout all of the films. But I really like this film because, in many ways, it is unnecessary. I mean, yeah, you could argue all these films were probably unnecessary, but a Han Solo origin story, because that's basically what this is. Nobody asked for that. Like nobody was sitting around saying, "Oh, I wonder how Han Solo got his name." But yet it's done with great execution. Alden Ehrenreich is wonderful in this film. I talk about somebody that had a huge task before them to play the young version of a character made popular and created by Harrison Ford, and yet he does it wonderfully. It's an excellent example of, I mean, not to the full extent of, say, Ewan McGregor with Obi-Wan, but it's sort of maybe a step or two below that. A solid effort. He makes it feel like this is his own, the character that we'll get to know in A New Hope, but yet he puts his own style and trademark on it. I always have a huge smile on my face, particularly when he finally, or when he first meets Chewie for the first time, and they have just that great interaction. And later on, he asks him what his name is, and he's like, I'm not going to call you, Chewbacca. I'm going to call you Chewie. Like, I mean, those are just great moments. From Han getting the Falcon, Donald Glover as Lando, brilliant casting, absolutely brilliant casting. Again, it's a throwback to the spaghetti westerns in a way, and I kind of like that it's truly a space western, and that's something that has always been sort of hinted at or alluded to in Star Wars, particularly with storylines involving Han, and certainly you can find expanded material and whatnot that sort of has taken this in directions before the movie. But it was nice and exciting to see it on the big screen for the first time. And I'm forever disappointed that this is the only one we're probably ever going to get. I would love to see them continue this, even as like a Disney Plus show, because I feel like there's so many more storylines you could tell, especially with Han and his introduction with Jabba. I mean, like the sky really is the limit, but I don't know. It's a fun, silly at points, but all in all, enjoyable movie that, again, sort of takes what you know about Star Wars, but sort of turns it upside down and expands it a little bit, and then influences it with, like I said, hints of spaghetti westerns. And again, it's Star Wars, but with a western take to it. I don't know. I just it shouldn't be as good as it is. It probably has no business being as good as it is. And I don't know. I just think they really nailed it with this one. I think it's the most fun of any of the Disney Star Wars films. In addition to it having, I think, the most Star Warsy feel. There's an interesting callback in a way to A New Hope, where it just is very, it's casual, it's high stakes, but there's that indescribable fun that was very much apparent and a lot of people picked up on in that first movie. And I feel this one just has it across the board. So Solo, make Solo 2 happen. I'm all about that hashtag every time it pops up every May 25th or sometime around then. But yeah, Solo, love this film. Absolutely love it.
Okay, cool. I agree with a lot of what you just said. And I'll just piggyback that by saying number 8 is Solo for me. So that's going to be next on mine. So I have that at
Ah,
number 8.
nice.
I agree with you. I think it's a very fun, very adventurous movie. We go to so many different planets. There are so many different sequences that are memorable. I do think it gets a bit messy and it could have been a little tighter,
Mhm.
like kind of like what you said. I feel like they had a checklist of things that nobody asked for that they wanted to get through, and it's like, okay, we don't need to see every single you know line that Han says from the original trilogy expanded upon. Like, you don't have to fit it all, guys. Let's just calm down a little. But so I do think it does get a little checklisty, if you will. But I think it's great too. I think the performances are great. Kira by Amelia Clark
Oh yeah.
is awesome. She's a great addition. It's really a shame that we're probably not going to get a sequel to her story. And she's
Hmm.
going to meet up with Maul. I mean, how fucking cool is that? We see the return of Maul at the end. Tobias, portrayed by Woody Harrelson, what an excellent casting choice for a movie like
Pitch perfect.
Solo. It is just incredible. He fits right in with that story. So I think the casting was great. I just think it's a shame because, again, I have to call out Disney. It was definitely poor planning on their part. Releasing this on a holiday weekend and kind of not really marketing this well. They could have saved it for a better release, because this is the last, quote unquote, a Star Wars story
Yeah.
that we got and that we might not get any others. And I really think that was a cool concept in general. We'll get to Rogue One as well, but I think those two movies really kind of broke up the Skywalker saga. Yeah, at the big screen level now we have all these shows,
Mm.
you know, the Mandalorian stuff. I love all those shows, but I'm a movie guy at heart. You know, I don't rewatch TV shows as much as I rewatch movies. I'm a, you know, I just want to see stuff on the big screen. I want to have my Blu-ray or my 4K and watch movies. So, you know, it's a
Cosign.
shame. It's a shame that because this movie underperformed a bit, and it still made money, but I guess for a Star Wars movie, it did underperform. That we're probably not going to get more of it because this was a really fun movie, and I have a great time with it. It's a lot of fun. It's not perfect, but
No.
it's a lot of fun. So definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll just add, I think it had the unfortunate placement of releasing about 5 months after The Last Jedi,
Yeah.
and certainly, I think if they had kept this with the December release date, I think it might have found its audience and done better numbers and probably been more receptive because it's one of those films where a lot of friends who like Star Wars, but not everybody saw this film in theaters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always one of those movies once you show it to people, because I mean, there's always that sort of, okay, what, a Han Solo prequel, like what the hell is going on here? But once that you show it to them, 9 out of 10, everybody's like, yeah, two thumbs up. This was a great time. So yeah, big disappointment that this
Yeah,
is
and
probably the last of it.
sorry to interrupt, but it
No, yeah.
almost had the it was an interesting choice to release it, especially because you know Han dies in the Force Awakens. It almost had that, I call it the Black Widow effect. It for Marvel
Oh,
when they come out with Black Widow, you know, after she dies in the Avengers, it's just kind of like, okay, we have a solo movie. It's a different actor. You
mm.
know, Han's already dead in the main timeline, so we're coming off Last Jedi. I agree with you. I think the timing of it all was just kind of a reason why a lot of people weren't super excited for the movie, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think if they had repackaged this as the first Disney Plus show, again, maybe that would have even been the way it
Yeah.
found its audience. But no, yeah, that's actually a good point about the Black Widow effect, because I do remember a lot of people being like, "Wait, well, Han's gone, so what does it like? Who cares?" kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And certainly, and begs the question, was it necessary? Probably not, but I don't, I always have such a fun time whenever I watch this movie.
Mm-hmm.
It
I
it
feel like
just
it's
has
getting
that.
that cult following too,
Yeah,
and I'm
it,
glad it's found its audience now.
yeah, yeah, it's funny to say that about Star Wars being, having a
I
cult
know, I
following, but
know.
here we
Yeah.
are. No,
Well, in terms of
no, I
Star
don't.
Wars,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
not
no,
yeah, of course.
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting one.
Everything's scaled up a bit when we're talking Star Wars. So
That's right. No, yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. Okay, so that was your number eight. My number eight, and again, everybody put down the virtual lightsabers. Number eight for me, interestingly enough, is episode eight, The Last Jedi.
okay.
And again, as I indicated, this was a film, the first time I saw it opening day back in 2017. And to date, I have never gone and seen a movie and been this disappointed. I left this film feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. I felt like I had been mugged. I was experiencing such a mixture of emotions. And I think part of what it was, fairly or unfairly, I had thought this film would be so much different than it actually was. And I think when it turned out to be the film that it was, I was so upset that, okay, we didn't get to see more of Luke, and this was how Luke was handled. Like the story, I thought it was going here, it went there, and I think it was the expectations game to some extent. And then I went and saw it the next day because I went with one group the opening night, and then had to contain myself to watch it the next day because like, oh boy, here we go again, because no one in the second group had seen it. So I'm like, all right, I'll shut up and keep my thoughts to myself. And again, I still had the same visceral reaction, but I tried to be more attentive, but I kept saying to myself, like, why are they doing this? What sense does this make? Okay, Finn had a great arc, and now he's basically second fiddle. Like not nothing made sense. And then of course the way Luke is handled, and again, I'm just going to get it out right now because even though I have come to accept a lot of this, and it's sort of funny, I'm talking about a film that's number 8 on my list, but I have some nits to pick. Um, there, there's a lot of what happens with Luke that I just as a fan, as sort of someone that appreciates a good story, I just cannot accept. And no matter how many times people will make this argument, I'm sorry, folks, but if Luke Skywalker saw the good in his diabolical fa mass murdering father, you're telling me just because his nephew had what is essentially bad dreams, his first reaction was, well, I'm going to kill him. Like, it's a choice. I guess that's what I'll say. It's a choice that I just can't quite wrap my head around. Um, but all that said, okay, I've gotten that out of off my chest. I won't dig into the Canto Bite stuff unless you want to go into it because it's an unnecessary sidebar. But what I do like about this film, and this is the film that I think of all of the uh, sequel trilogy films, it has aged like a wine for me, which is not how I expected it the first time I saw it. But I can see now more of what Rian Johnson was trying to accomplish with this film. And it's meant to be subversive. It's meant to take the story in a different turn. Now, we can certainly have an argument, a point about, well, The Force Awakens has it going one way and Rian Johnson took it in a completely other. I mean, that's behind the scenes with what was going on and the issues of not having a roadmap of where your story's going. But for all that said, as as a almost could call it like a standalone Star Wars movie, it really does take the mythology and turn it on its head. It gets to the real debate, if you will, of what is this great conflict between the Jedi and the Sith? What is the difference between the light and the dark? And in a lot of ways, the film feels the most George Lucas like. And the reason I say that is if you've ever read any of the sort of behind the scenes notes and story treatments that George Lucas had for his version of the sequel trilogy, a lot of what you see in The Last Jedi, now I'm not saying an exact replica, but a lot of those points, if you will, particularly with Luke sort of being in exile and trying to rediscover the Force again. That's all there in George Lucas's original vision. And so that I can honestly appreciate more. And again, the moments in this film, because there's a lot of points where they pop and they stand out. The Kylo Ray Snoke scene is easily one of the probably the I would put it like the top 5 lightsaber battles moments of the entire saga. It's just again, this is where subverting the expectations really was handled well, I think. But yeah, between that, I think Luke staring down the First Order, the fact that Rey is a nobody, I think was brilliant because it showed, okay, the Force can be with anybody. There's no one special family or one special person. It's all about the individual, and that was. I thought a really refreshing way to go instead of it being okay. Well, who is she? Is she Luke's daughter? Or is she, Kenobi? Well, of course we know how it all turned out, but it was, I thought, a unique way to go, and it wasn't the conventional direction because you could have easily said, well, it's Luke's long lost daughter, and people would have gone nuts, or well, they probably would have gone nuts either way. But um, yeah, there's a lot certainly to dislike about the film. It's far from perfect, but there's more to it that I can appreciate, and it's in a lot of ways a cerebral Star Wars movie. It really does, I think, try to get to the core of the entire Star Wars mythology. And even though the rise of Skywalker goes in its own direction, there are storylines in this film that I would have loved to have seen carried on. Again, Kylo sort of going down his path at the end of this film. I would have liked to have seen where that could have gone in another direction, or Rey being a nobody, or seeing the effect of Luke's great sacrifice and how that rallied the galaxy. I think there's a lot in this film that I can certainly appreciate, and as the years have gone on, I think it's the richest of the sequel trilogy films, and it has the most, I think, in a way, in common with what George Lucas always tried to do with Star Wars, which was to make it different, which was try to make it not like what we have seen before. Now, again, to varying results with this film, like the Mary Poppins scene that you alluded to earlier on, but there's more that I can give credit for this film than I can take away from it. And like I said, in 2017, if anyone said, "What's your least favorite Star Wars film?" I would have said The Last Jedi, hands down. But here it is now, all these years later. It's number 8 on my list. So hope springs eternal, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying for sure, and I can commend Johnson for trying to tackle these themes. And I do agree with you with the parallels to Lucas, but I'm sorry, man, I still can't get on board. I just think it was handled so disastrously, you know, especially because, and I touched on it, we never got to see prime Luke,
Yeah,
Master Skywalker Luke, you know, in his heyday, and we're looking forward to this trilogy. He's not in The Force Awakens. He's at the very end. It's that, oh my God moment leaving the theater. So now you're waiting for the next one called The Last Jedi. It's like that, oh shit. Like this is going to
it's going
be
down.
Luke's
Yeah,
swan song, you know?
yeah.
And to just get what we got, I mean, our hero, just seeing our hero just in shambles and then pulling basically a old Ben Kenobi move, just sacrificing himself. Yeah, I agree that it is commendable what he tried to touch on. I just think that it was poorly handled, so that's
No,
why
that's
it doesn't
fair.
really age for me. So okay, that's respectable though. So let's keep chugging along. We're at
All
number
right.
7
Number
already.
7. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like Solo, my number 8, this is another great adventure movie. Number 7 for me is Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Um, I probably have this higher up than, and I know you don't have it yet on your list, so you have it higher up than most people.
Oh yeah.
I mean, most people dog on this movie. I've
Oh,
I've heard some pretty animated opinions on this movie. I think this movie, it's obviously not my favorite in the prequel because I didn't get to episode 3 yet, but in terms of aging, I think this movie has aged the best considering how poorly it's been received, especially the years following its release. At least for me, I think looking at it now, I really, and I go into it because I try to be on the cynic side, and I go into it trying to look for what the issues are, and they're not that big for me. I'm gonna be honest. People talk about the writing. The writing is fine. I mean, you have a couple of, I guess, cheesy lines, but it's okay. Dude, Hayden Christensen is fine. I
thank
we'll
you.
get to episode 3. I think he portrays a young, angsty, but pretty much boy. I mean, he's a teenager, battling within himself so brilliantly in that movie, but you start to see the seeds in this movie as well.
Mhm.
And I think he gets too much flack, and I'm really glad that he's being embraced now. I mean, he's
Finally.
back. He's back on the Disney Plus shows.
Yep.
His return in the Ahsoka series, I don't know if you caught that, was
Epic.
amazing. I was just eating it up, hook, line, and sinker. I know it was total, fanfare, but I loved it. So it's really glad to see him back,
Oh,
in Star
definitely.
Wars. So I think he's fine. the sense of scale in this movie is really impressive. I
Hmm.
think more than the others in the prequels, especially. We go to so many different systems and so many different planets. You have Obi-Wan's journey to find out, who's making these clones, and his interaction with, Jango Fett and stuff,
Hmm.
is really well done. So I think that is cool. This is the one movie where you have Obi-Wan and Anakin, side by side, working together. In episode 3, you don't really get that as much. This is kind of shows that a little bit more, especially the opening sequence and stuff, and them protecting Padme and all that. Count Dooku, the
Oh,
introduction of Count Dooku. I need more Dooku, and that's the only critique I have of these prequels. It introduces these amazing characters, and it really doesn't, you know, highlight them as much. I don't know if you checked out Tales of the Jedi, the animated show on
no, not
Disney.
yet.
I highly recommend it because it adds some layers to Dooku. There's a couple episodes about Dooku, and his adventures, and it's
Hmm.
it's a really good watch. It's super quick. They're super quick hit episodes, like 20 minutes or whatever, like even
Okay.
shorter, maybe even 15 minutes. So you can watch it in an afternoon. But I highly recommend it. But that's what I wanted from the movies. I wanted more depth to guys like
Mm.
Dooku, but to its credit, it does have Dooku, so I have to give it its credit. He's awesome. I just think that this movie gets hated on. I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, at least from what I've seen, I think this is the most hated movie in terms of the prequels. I think it gets more
Oh,
hate than Phantom Menace for sure. People
easily.
call it, oh, the sappy romance and stuff. It's like that is essential to the story. That is, so we need it. We can't not have that. So I yeah, I like this movie a lot. I have a lot of fun with it. It's a great time. I love the introduction of the droids. The droid army is great, and all that stuff. And the politics are, they kind of were a little bit much for me growing up, but now that I'm a grown man, I can kind of embrace those
Oh yeah.
aspects of the stories more. So that's what helps it be rewatchable for me. Is you have those depths. You have, Senator Palpatine and him starting to weave his way and sneak his way through the Senate. That's really cool. Yeah, I like this movie. I think this should have been, in a way, the episode 1
Hmm.
of the prequels, and then we could
Interesting.
have gotten an entire episode 2 of the Clone Wars. That's
Hmm.
kind of how I would have maybe liked to see it, but
Hmm.
this is what we got, and I like the movie a lot, and I think it gets unfairly hated on for sure. So yeah, number 7, Attack of the Clones. I have a lot of fun with this movie.
Well, I will. I'll save the rest of my thoughts because it will be a little bit later on. But no,
Cool.
I agree with everything that you have said. It's we mentioned my sister Jen at the top of it. This is her favorite uh, Star Wars movie, pretty much of all. I mean,
That's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
she loves this film. Has always had just a soft spot for it. Um, and yeah, again, I'll save my thoughts for it later. But all right. So n number 7 for me is Rogue One, and to me, I think this is easily the best made Disney Star Wars film. It it really is flawless in a way, and sort of in the same way as Solo. It tells a story that did we really need to know about how they got the plans for the Death Star? It's merely a line in the exposition of the crawl in A New Hope, but yet they were able to take that and expand it into this really multi-layered and engaging story that I, I I'm always amazed that they had the balls, if you will, to kill everybody off in this film. Because I mean, certainly canon wise, everybody had to had to bite it, but with the way things are today, with cutouts and stories being rewritten and characters surviving, I went into this thinking, okay, I'm sure they're going to find a third act twist to somehow have these people go into hide, the protection program in Star Wars or something. But no, they actually lived up to it being a war movie. And there's something kind of interesting about this being truly the first war movie in Star Wars. I mean, I get, all the other films have had battles and great moments, but I mean, this plays like one half of a spy heist movie, and on the other half, a just a traditional all guns and glory war film. And it's raw, it's brutal, but it still remembers to have a lot of fun. And I love the whole storyline between Jyn Erso and her father. Again, that's what Star Wars is all about, this dynamic between families. And I like how it's this dynamic between a father and a daughter this time. I thought that was sort of a nice mirror image of Luke and Vader. And of course, the Vader stuff in this film, he's not in a lot of it, but when he is in the film, I mean, this is some peak Star Wars moments here. I mean, again, I remember seeing this opening night in the theater and being just in awe, like, holy shit, like they're actually going to do it. And of course, it's great to see Darth Vader in his prime, pulling out the lightsaber and just, going to town on some rebels right there. But in addition to that, I mean, it's just such a rich film that expands the sort of the world and the politics of the prequels and fleshes everything out to tie nicely with A New Hope. And it was great to see Mon Mothma expanded on and played by the same actress who had the role in episode three. I'm forgetting her name, but she, of course, has gone on, to do the Andor series and really expand that character into, to someone who really just had a brief role in Return of the Jedi. So that kind of felt nice with that. And of course, Jimmy Smits returns as Bail Organa. And again, just nice little moments that, it leans into the nostalgia a little bit, but it's all more or less in service of the story. Like everything feels like it has a nice future uh, payoff, if you will, certainly in A New Hope, but even in the rest of the trilogy that follows. I love this film. I love it for its commitment. It promises to be an all-out battle, and it's a war film. It really draws heavy inspiration from films of that genre, but still keeping it Star Wars. Yeah, it's easily the best made Disney Star Wars film, and it delivers some of the most shocking and just awe-inspiring moments of the entire Star Wars saga. So yeah, definitely this is a very high on my list, and certainly my favorite of anything Disney has put out past and since. This really, I felt, is the high watermark of what they've done with the series.
For sure. And I agree with you. When this was announced, I was thinking, wait, Rogue One, but do we really need to tell this?
Yeah,
So I really wasn't that excited about it. I saw it in theaters, obviously, and I was the same way. I was like, okay, like let's see what they take it here. And I agree with everything you said. Number six for me is Rogue One, so we'll roll right into my number six. I totally agree with you. I think this was only made possible, and this was only so well received because of director Gareth Edwards and
bingo.
director of photography Greg Fraser, who was also director of photography of the new Dune movies, which I know you're a huge fan of. So I know he's near and dear to your heart. Those two men just put together such a beautiful movie. And you said that Solo felt the most like Star Wars. I'm going to counter that and say that Rogue One felt the most like the original trilogy
That's
in
fair.
terms of its look and the
Hmm.
way it feels. The way, like, if you watch this movie before A New Hope, it flows so
Hmm.
effortlessly and seamlessly. I mean, they nailed that classic Star Wars look and feel, I think.
Hmm.
And the
That's a
fact
good
that it
point.
is a war movie and there really is no Jedi,
Hmm.
it's a remarkable that a feat that they were able to pull this off. I think The characters are definitely its strength.
Mm.
Jen Erso, played by Felicity Jones, Cassian Andor by Diego Luna. They are
Oh yeah.
great together. They are fantastic. I'm really, really happy he got his own show. That
Mm.
show was really well received, so I think he deserved that for sure. Even what's his name, Ben Mendelsohn as Director Krennic,
Oh
um,
yeah.
fucking great. He's awesome. Pardon my
He's
French, but
always great.
and then
Yeah.
like you said, Mads Mikkelsen as Galen Erso is amazing. The entire cast, Forrest Whitaker,
Oh yeah.
just amazing, and they are the heart and soul of this movie, and that is why the ending hits so hard. I mean, I know you talk about they have the balls to kill everyone, and I agree that it was the right call, but I'd be lying if I said in the theater I wasn't rooting for them to live because
Oh, I know.
it
That's the thing.
just is
Yep.
gut wrenching when you see that bomb go off and you
Yeah.
know they're on the shores and they're like, oh man, you really fell in love with these characters,
Yeah.
which is really hard to do in a franchise that this came after The Force Awakens, so this is number 8 in the franchise. This is the 8th movie,
Mhm.
so to get a side quest story like this and to introduce brand new characters and for us to make for them to make fans fall in love with them in one short movie really is, like I said, kudos to the entire crew and also the cast. It's phenomenal. I love this movie so much. It's definitely not a movie that I can just throw on when I'm doing something else.
No, no.
I need it needs my full undivided attention.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, I was really hoping that Jin Urso especially survived, but she unfortunately did not. But it is great, and I won't even get into. We can spend a whole episode on peak Darth Vader.
Yeah.
The ending of this movie is just. Oof. I mean, you see, I got the tattoo here
Oh,
of the bucket. I
nice.
got the bucket behind me. So, greatest villain of all time. Seeing him in the ending, just lighting that lightsaber. I in the theater. I believe I was just beside myself. I was so happy. So, yeah, great movie. Great movie. Number 6 for me.
No, absolutely. And clearly it's the most successful, I think, of the entire sort of Disney era of Star Wars when you count Andor and that's now heading into a second season. I mean, this film clearly resonated in a way that I'm not sure people fully appreciate because it again for a simple story, it did a lot for the lore and sort of the greater mythology and
Yeah.
again, you're seeing that payoff with Andor, which I mean, again, talk about a show where we know the outcome, we know what's going to happen to him, and yet there's that investment with it because again, I think just the character was so interesting and well developed that you're going to follow the story regardless of sort of where the outcome goes.
Yeah, for sure.
No, wonderful film. Absolutely wonderful film. All right, so my next one on the list, and it's certainly going to shock a lot of people because, like you said, this film gets a lot of hate, but I do not understand it to this day. Attack of the Clones. This
Cool.
movie is, first off, it's a fun time. Like, there's so much cool action in this film. I mean, Yoda has his first lightsaber on screen in this film. What a moment. I can remember when that happened, the audience went nuts. I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, wait a minute, Yoda's coming in there and he's catching this stuff and he's throwing it back, and then all of a sudden he whips out the lightsaber, like, oh shit, okay, it's happening. All right, here he's going. And I mean that's just one of the many moments. I mean, we're getting to see the Jedi in their prime in this film. The great battle on Geonosis, the start of the Clone Wars. You've got Obi-Wan Kenobi sort of taking a kind of a private detective angle for much of the film and investigating what's going on with the clones and Kamino, and of course you got the introduction of Jango Fett. It's just such a wildly entertaining movie. But then there's so much more to it than that. You've got the sort of the beginning of the end of the Republic with what Palpatine is doing and all of his machinations in the shadow and frankly in broad view. And the central story, the whole reason the saga exists. You have the introduction and love story of Anakin and Padme, which people can have an issue with it, but without that, there is no storyline. That is it. That is what leads to Darth Vader, Anakin becoming Darth Vader. And you tie that in with his premonitions about his mother and then his mother dying and him feeling responsible. There's a lot going on in this film, and I think it gets unfairly criticized because of dialogue. And I've never understood that. Guys, the Star Wars films have always had issues with the dialogue. Like we're not talking Shakespeare here, folks. Like there's nothing in this movie that makes you think, God, that's a terrible line. Like again, I'll go off on a riff about the sand. That's actually a very deep poetic line, and I think okay, maybe the way it's executed with the delivery, fine, but to have an issue with that and even just hating Christensen's performance overall. I mean, in a lot of ways, the Jedi are like priests or monks, and you're seeing the effect of that on Anakin Skywalker, who is taken from his mother at an early age, has never had a quote unquote normal life. So he doesn't know how to talk to people. He doesn't know how to interact with someone like Padme. Like, again, I'm not trying to make excuses here, but like, just it's easier to hate on things, I guess, is what I would say,
Yeah.
versus to sort of take a step back and actually watch the movie and appreciate the story. I think it's a beautiful film that is essential to the entire saga because it follows through with what we see in episode one, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But it's all right there, the central conflict of what the next film is going to be about, and frankly, what the next set of films are going to be like after that. It all begins right here with this movie. I mean, I guess my one nitpick, if I could find one, it's we don't get to see more of the Clone Wars. I mean, yes, I know there's the TV shows and
Yeah.
all of that, but would have loved to have seen a full movie dedicated to the Clone Wars themselves and Anakin and Obi-Wan going on their adventures and seeing that side of the story as opposed to having it in TV format, which, sidebar, I am a big fan and believer that Star Wars is a special franchise that belongs only on the big screen. I know the Disney Plus shows are great, and certainly I've enjoyed a number of them. But to me, Star Wars is meant to be seen on the biggest screen imaginable, and there's just something just magical about the movie experience. But again, that's for another day. We can have a whole episode on my feelings about that particular issue. But this film unfairly hated. There's a lot there with this movie. And just on top of the fact, it's just such a fun, action-packed movie. And,
Hmm.
again, from a filmmaking standpoint, this is the movie where George Lucas really got to make his jump, if you will, with digital technology. It's certainly the seeds are there in episode one, but you really get to see him play with the digital canvas even more so in this film. I mean, we get the first digital Yoda, which, certainly, I have my, love for the puppet, but you couldn't do the lightsaber battles. You couldn't do all these different things with strictly puppets or confined characters. You need to have that extra tool. And so I applaud this film. I think it gets unnecessary hate, and again, it's essential. Like everything is set up in this movie to have a payoff in three, four, five, and ultimately in six. It's essential and a central film to the entire saga. And again, like you said earlier, I'm so glad to see Hayden Christensen getting all the recognition and flowers for his role as Anakin because again, I've been on Team Hayden from the very beginning, so it's nice to see everybody else coming on board on board with that whole thing.
Thank you for acknowledging Yoda. I kind of overlooked him when I was talking about this movie, but totally agree. Seeing Yoda, because as a kid, I liked Yoda in the originals, but it's just an old hermit. It wasn't until this movie, seeing this movie in theaters, that I really got the sense of how powerful Yoda is because he's still older.
Yeah.
He's not. peak Yoda. He's not
No.
in his prime, but he still handles Dooku, who gave our other Jedi a lot of problems. And his fighting style, seeing his fighting style for the first time, just of course that's the way he fights, right? Just jumping
Yeah.
all over the place and just hitting you from all different angles.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So kudos to George for pulling that off. That moment in theaters was
Oh,
legendary for sure. So yeah, definitely. Okay. Great remarks on that. So we've been kind of neck and neck in our rankings. I think
yeah. I'm curious to see how things are gonna. Yeah.
this is probably our biggest deviation so far because
Yeah.
in my top five, number five, I have episode 7, The Force Awakens.
Okay.
So I am much higher on this movie than you are. I think you had this at 10, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
10.
I said before, I was eating this movie up. I left the theater for the first time so jazzed that Star Wars was back. You know, I agree that it's similar to A New Hope. I mean, how could you not agree? You'd be living in denial if, a lot of the points weren't hit. But I think it came at a necessary time. And I think it was done intentionally. And I'm going to be honest with you, man. I left the theater and I went on, of course, the internet, which I probably shouldn't have done. And I was seeing people right off the bat having issues with it. And I'm like, what is going on with the Star Wars? Like, can we not just enjoy a new Star Wars movie? I did not understand. I remember getting into my car thinking, like, finally, we have a new movie that everyone can just hoorah about, and
Nope.
still we didn't get that. And I'm like, come on. But I think the story is fine. Like I said, I think it fits fine, especially after the prequels. We needed to have kind of almost a return to form of people that grew up with the originals, and it's a familiar story. I don't think it's not an issue for me. I loved seeing the Millennium Falcon again. Seeing the trailer for the first time and seeing the Falcon for the first time, just goosebumps, man, goosebumps. Like I said, I ate this movie up, and I still do to this day. I think it's so fun. You never touched on this, but the new fighting style that is unique to these sequels,
Mm.
that's introduced in this movie, the new, it's almost like heavier attacks with the sabers.
Yeah.
People nitpick it and they talk about the science of it, and
Yeah. That's silly.
it's laser swords, they shouldn't be heavy. It's like, guys, this is a space soap opera. Can we just because I there's a reason it was done that way, and I think it fits thematically and emotionally with this movie.
It's
The
an
fact that
evolution.
it's more lumbering strikes. I mean, there's more weight behind the attacks because Kylo has so much weight, in his heart, if you will. And
Hmm.
so I could talk about that for 20 minutes, but I won't. So I do like the new fighting style. You touched on Kylo. I think this is Kylo's best movie. He's pretty good in The Last Jedi, but maybe I just haven't watched that movie enough to really, appreciate him, because I just can't get on board with that movie in general. But I love Kylo Ren. Adam Driver is great.
Mm.
I've talked about Rey. She's a great new protagonist. She's awesome. I think it has the perfect amount of nostalgia without going too overboard. Like I said, you got Han, you got Chewie, you got the Falcon back. I just thought it was really well done. I also was disappointed. I think Finn had a great arc in this movie, and was really disappointed to not see him progress and to be a force user. I think he was great in this movie. Him and Ray's relationship, and then him and Poe, they
Mm.
have a special relationship which is explored more in the movies later on. But I think such wasted potential to have him not be really the co-lead with Ray moving forward as two, you know, force users and Jedi, if you will, kind of bringing a halt to the First Order.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have a lot of fun with this movie. I think it's a really great time, and I don't get why people can't just have fun with Star Wars. I remember saying to myself, like, what do you guys want? You critique the prequels for going on almost 15 years. That it's too different and it doesn't feel like Star Wars. They give you a movie that feels like the original, it has the same talking point, and people weren't happy. So I just feel like you can never win with this franchise with some of these fans. But I am unapologetically a huge lover of this movie, and I still watch it to this day. I think it's super rewatchable as well.
I love that for you. And And no, nobody hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans, I
Oh man,
guess. Yeah,
yeah,
the gatekeeping that goes on. I mean, I could do a whole episode just with
yeah,
my thoughts on that, but we don't want to be here all night, and that'll be a rabbit hole we don't want to go down. Um, I will add just yeah, it is a movie you can throw on and just have a lot of fun with. Again, it's the Star Wars movie that we needed at the time. And sadly, we'll never get that again because, the time no one thought was ever going to be another Star Wars
yeah,
after episode three. And then of course, the long awaited return was a monumental event. And now of course, Star Wars is everywhere and anywhere. So there's that my point again about Star Wars being a special institution on the big screen. But no, again, just you know, it's a fun time. It's a fun time. I'll leave it at that. All right, so top five. Yeah, like I said, we've been pretty much neck and neck this entire up until this point. This one certainly is much higher on my list than yours, and certainly I think on a lot of people's. But The Phantom Menace. Talk about a film for me that continues to age wonderfully. I mean, even more so than The Last Jedi. And for me, I think I mean, one, it was the first new Star Wars film that I saw in the theaters. So there is that bit of nostalgia that's always been attached to it because this was the first new Star Wars film. And there was so much energy and excitement behind this film. I mean, Darth Maul was everywhere. I mean, I had every action figure imaginable and posters and books. I mean, I ate up this movie before it came out, and then when it finally arrived, I mean, I was just awestruck from beginning to end. I mean, just the scope of this movie, it is so massive, and we're going to. We go back to Tatooine, but we go to all these different new planets. We go to Coruscant, which is easily one of my favorite worlds in the entire Star Wars saga. I just love the look and feel of that place, especially with a lot more of sort of the deeper story that goes on there, particularly in the later two films. But I mean, I know this film is divisive for people, and there's a reason why 25 years later, we're still talking about it and debating it. But again, I have to give it to George Lucas for making the film that he made because certainly the easy way could have been to have just shown, either Darth Vader again or, a different kind of movie. And I think I have to give him props for having a commitment to the story and knowing where this was going to go. And I think there's something kind of poignant and tragic about showcasing who Anakin was as a 9-year-old boy. And I mean, yeah, probably he should have been a little bit older, just for it to make more sense, probably in the story, and especially with the budding romance with Padme. But all that aside, I mean, I think there's something inherently tragic about the idea of this young innocent boy going down the path of evil and becoming this really sad and at times even pathetic character. I think he had to almost go back and show the beginnings and tell us how could someone become Darth Vader. And I thought that was sort of interesting to show that no, not everybody starts out evil. I mean, not everybody, Palpatine is one in a million. Like, and there's an interesting story about the corruption and how innocence can be taken away. And again, from a politics standpoint, this film is so fascinating to watch because there's a lot of real life parallels, certainly, in modern day, but even throughout world history that you see in this film that, certainly at the time, I couldn't have appreciated those films, those messages and themes. But as you get older and you watch them, I mean, it's really amazing what George Lucas was going there. I know people, will sort of shit on, oh, Trade Federation, this, but like, guys, that is so essential to the story. I mean, this is how Palpatine rises to power. And, again, this is an age-old story that is throughout world and human history of people taking advantage of situations to amass power for themselves and then ultimately to use it to nefarious ends. So there's a lot there. Like I said with episode two, but again, this movie sets up everything. It all goes forward from this movie, particularly the original saga. And again, just to see a young Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I mean, Ewan McGregor is just pitch perfect casting. I mean, nobody could have played a young Obi-Wan better than Ewan McGregor. You've got Liam Neeson in this movie as Qui-Gon Jinn. I think a vastly underrated and underappreciated character that has a great sort of, you know, dichotomy between how Obi-Wan trains Anakin and versus how he might have done the job. Uh, you touched on Darth Maul. My only regret is I wish he could have been the villain throughout all three films. Again, story-wise, yeah, I get it. It kind of, yeah, had to have that progression for Obi-Wan, but just such a cool and terrifying character. And, for someone who barely speaks in the movie, he left quite an impression. I mean, I remember, I had the double-bladed lightsaber, growing up, and I mean, it was hours of recreating those lightsaber battles from this movie, with family and friends in the backyard. I really have a soft spot for this film, but it's such a vast and just rich movie that, like I said, it's everything here. The whole tenets of the galaxy, the struggle of the Skywalkers, it's all right there in this movie. And while it may not have been the movie that fans and people were looking for at the time, and again, I'm not saying it is perfect because there are some issues with pacing and whatnot, but all in all, I have to give it to George Lucas for having a commitment to the vision and wanting to tell the story that he wants to tell. I mean, a studio-led movie, a studio-led production would never have made The Phantom Menace. They would have gone, in a way like The Force Awakens. And I'm not, trying to, dump on that, but this is very much a personal film and very much the vision of one director. And I can't imagine, Disney, for example, saying, "Yeah, let's show a 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker." That's what people want to see. And again, this is a lot of times Star Wars is about, I think, subverting of the expectations. And yeah, this one, it isn't going to land for everybody. And certainly, if people have issues with it, that's fine. Again, I'm not trying to say it's a misunderstood masterpiece, but like Attack of the Clones, I think there's a lot there, and I mean, just put aside all the politics and the story and the world building, it's just a fun time. It's a fun movie. I mean, we didn't even touch on the pod racing. I mean, that was amazing. I mean, I remember just like I wanted to have a pod, when I was a kid. Like I was, scheming how could I, get like a replica or something like that, and you know, play around with it in the backyard. But yeah, lot of great memories from this film, just as a fan of Star Wars.
Question for you. What
Yeah.
did you think of the introduction of the midichlorians? I have to ask.
Yeah. You
I
know,
mean, this movie's top five for you, so I gotta ask.
at the time, I think it went over my head. It was
Of
just,
course, yeah,
you
of
know,
course, yeah.
I probably didn't pay much attention of it. I really, I think it's a unique explanation. I know it has been expanded upon in other shows or even in novels and stories and comics, to try to, clarify, maybe what George was going for. Um, I saw an interview with Liam Neeson once where he sort of tried to explain what he thought the midichlorians were or are, and his explanation came with a George Lucas quote. And basically, it's that feeling you have in your gut, and in your gut you have all these bacterias and whatnot, and in one of them is sort of that intuition and feeling. I'm paraphrasing it uh to a degree, but that's it. Like that, there's nothing more there, and it's. I mean, it's sort of classic George Lucas in a way, like just sort of adding some maybe some extra exposition that was probably needed. Like, I mean, that would probably be, I guess, I won't call it an issue, but more of a nitpick. Like, yeah, it's probably best left unexplained. Like, I
Yeah,
know it sort of ties in nicely in with the whole Chosen One storyline, but it's kind of telling that there's never another mention of midichlorians in the rest of the of
exactly.
the
Yeah,
prequels, or frankly in any other Star Wars film. So,
yeah.
like, sometimes less is more. That's what George Lucas probably overindulged a little bit.
It's a small moment. So, but I
Yeah,
love asking people to see where they land on that. I
yeah.
think it's fun trying
Where
to.
where do you land?
I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah,
I like the Force being just this intangible feeling. I
yeah.
don't like putting a number to it. And I know it's not. They try to explain it. It's not an exact science. It's
No,
more of your potential, but I think it would have been left.
I think the
If it was
best.
left on the cutting room floor, I think it would.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't have.
Yeah,
It's not necessary. I mean, to me, the best explanation of the Force is still from Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back. That's all you need.
yeah.
Simple and to the point.
All right,
All
here we
right, so
go.
here we go. Now we're getting to the
So
real
I
top four.
I believe we have the same top four. I've
Oh,
been keeping
okay.
track
All
here,
right then.
but I
I've
think
been
it's
looking at my list. I'm saying, okay, I'm
yeah.
wondering if there's gonna be some overlap now.
Yeah, so we have the same top four. I think that's where the similarity ends, though, because my number four, and I know this is going to be higher up for you, is Return of the Jedi, Episode 6. Fantastic film. It's top four. All the issues I have with the movie are super, super minor. It's really just all comes down to personal taste and preference at this point. I mean, all of these are fantastic films. This movie is my favorite version of Luke.
Hmm.
This is I love Luke, especially in the all black. You
Yeah,
know, this takes place. Is it 3 years after Empire? I believe.
I think
Uh,
it's around that. Yeah.
so you really get a sense that time has passed when you see Luke. I mean, it's such a different version of Luke right off
Mhm.
the bat, and you can tell that he's really been training that entire time and really have been, coming to terms with everything that happened in Empire. So I love this version of Luke. Um, I do wish it was a bit grander in scale. It was the final installment. We have New Hope, which was a little bit smaller in scale. You have Empire, which takes it to another level. It kind of goes back down a notch in terms of the overall scale. For a conclusion to the series, I wish it was a little bit more grandiose, if you
Mhm.
will. But again, that's a minor nitpick. I understand thematically why it's not.
Mhm.
You have the big crescendo in Empire, and then you kind of come down a little bit in Return of the Jedi. So I totally get it. This is again just personal preference. The other nitpick I have, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
I don't totally love the Death Star 2.0 plot. It always confused me as a kid watching these movies when I was really little. Like, it helped or it didn't help distinguish the films enough because we have Death Star in A New Hope, and then I remember getting confused with Return of the Jedi because wait, there's another Death Star. Didn't they kill the Death Star the first time? So I don't love the fact that they just try to rebuild another Death Star. I think that was kind of, dare I say, lazy,
Mhm.
but just it doesn't really work for me. But again, that's minor.
Mhm.
The entire third act is incredible in this movie. That's really where it hits its high point. Obviously, when Luke, he goes back to Dagobah. You have the whole sequence of Yoda who passes away and joins the Force. That is awesome. But when Luke reaches the Death Star and gets, you know, pretty much turns himself over. I mean, from that point on, it's just peak. That's
Mhm.
all I could say. It's
Yeah.
peak. I love it so much. Um, People remember Luke from these final moments with the Emperor and with Vader as being this super forgiving. I'm not going to let hatred win, but there are a couple moments that he momentarily lets his, I guess, emotions get the best of him, and he
Mhm.
has to, when they bring up Leia, I believe,
Mhm.
and he lets his emotions get the best of him. But so I like that, and I know there's a reason why George put him in all black. We could talk about that. He wanted people to think that he maybe would join Vader and join the dark side. Looking back on it, it's like, how could people ever believe that? Because it's Luke Skywalker. But back in the day, I mean, coming off the heels of Empire, where the good guys lost, I mean, anything was possible going into this movie. So I love that choice that he did. And he's really playing with you too in these scenes. He's really like kind of exploring that. Like, what if Luke does in
Mhm.
this moment, turn? But of course, he never does. I think Vader saving Luke from Sidious is one of the great cinematic moments in movie history, sci-fi history, whatever you want to call it, history. It is just so great. It's such a great payoff. All of Luke's training and his forgiveness towards his father, like you said, family comes first in this Star Wars saga, the Skywalker saga, and it's really hit home all the way back in the 1980s in Return of the Jedi. I mean, it's so monumental. um, I, I love this movie so much. It's top four for me. I didn't even get into the Ewoks and the other, Han and Leia and their, adventures with Chewie and all that. That stuff is great too. This movie is really really good, and every time I watch it, I'm reminded of how good it is. And I was struggling. This was one of the movies doing my rankings where I wanted to put it higher, but I was going back and forth with this and my number three, and it settled at four, but to no fault of its own. It's an incredible movie and a great conclusion to that trilogy for sure.
I'll, I'll I'll save more, but I will just co-sign with what you said because it's a hell of a film, absolutely hell of a film. Number four for me,
Real
actually,
quick, real quick,
yeah, no,
touch on the Death Star.
yeah, no, yeah,
Just
yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts real quick on that. Yeah.
I think when I was younger, I don't really think it honestly made that much of a difference. Like I was, oh, okay, they built the Death Star again, whoop de
Mm-hmm.
do. I mean, I guess if you look at this as what was originally one film,
Mm-hmm.
the Death Star battle was the big climax at the end, but obviously that happens in episode four, so George needed another uh, technological showdown, if you will, in the film. So I guess it worked once, work again. Sort of creates that recurring theme of Death Stars in Star Wars. But as I've gotten older, like I mean, yeah, it probably would have been more interesting if there had been something else. I'm not sure what that something else could have been.
Yeah.
But I at the same time I can kind of get behind it because it sort of fits with the Empire. Like these are not a creative bunch of people here. Like Palpatine, like, well, okay, it worked pretty well. Yeah, it got blown up, but you know what? Try again. Like, there's something, in history about like these, dictators and whatnot, never learning from their mistakes. So
Yeah.
there's some like historical parallels that I can kind of, get on board with. I mean, from a story, just sort of a visual standpoint, yeah, it might have been more interesting to have had something else, but I guess, they change up a little bit because it's under construction for most of the movie. So you get kind of that, incomplete look as
But
opposed to
it's
the last
fully
film.
operational. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the big twist
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah, it's fine. I guess
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
fine.
No, you make a good point too that, now that we have the prequels and we have Palpatine, aka Sidious, the grand schemer that he is and how genius he is, it's easy for me to go back and say, yeah, I was kind of lazy on his part. But I guess back in the day, it would have made sense a little bit more because it's like the Empire is just a machine,
Yeah.
and they're just gonna like do it again. Yeah, that okay, I'll accept that for sure. And it's not a big, like I said, it's not a big
No,
nitpick.
like I said, I
It's
mean,
just kind of
we're gonna
something that I've
be.
always thought was curious why he made that
It's
decision.
an interesting choice. It's an
Yeah.
interesting choice. It's like how originally the Ewoks were going to be Wookiees.
Mm.
And then they changed that around. But yeah, I mean, here we're getting into like we're splitting hairs with these top four
Yeah, we're
because I
getting
mean
into the
it's
weeds for sure.
no,
Yeah.
no, seriously, like I said, there's everything else, and then there's these four.
But you kind of have to, because
Well,
again,
that's
this
the
is
thing.
these
This is
movies are so great when we get
Oh
up
no,
to this.
seriously, no. When you're up to here, you're in the big leagues now, guys.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So number four for me, and this I know will shock people. But again, send your comments and whatnot. It is Star Wars or A New Hope, if you will. That is number four, fitting. It's number four, I guess. And this movie, of course, is the one that started it all. And I could understand anybody that would say that, well, this movie has to be number one because it started everything. And I'll grant all that. Um, it's of the original trilogy, it's the one I revisit the least. And it's not because it's a bad film. It's just what comes after this film is just so much more engaging for me. Um, but you have to think at the time, this was such a revolutionary movie. And just from a visual standpoint, I mean, I can't imagine what it would have been like to see Star Wars in the theaters in 1977. I mean, we're transfixed by it, just as fans now, but I can't imagine what audiences must have thought in May of 1977, seeing something like this, which was unlike any movie before. I mean, it's this amazing creation of just other worlds and characters, which are just unlike anything people had ever seen. But yet there's that unique similarity to it because there's the universal story themes, a hero's journey. There's a lot of fairy tale homages in this. I mean, that's kind of what I really like about this film or love about it is that it really does take on that sort of, fantasy aspect. I mean, I know some people say, oh, it's science fiction. I mean, yeah, but it's really more space fantasy. I mean, you said it's a family soap opera. I mean, this is not meant to it isn't Dune, I guess to say. I'm not saying that in a negative or as a critique, but they're totally different stories and worlds and genres. This is much more space fantasy, and I really like how there is all of those interesting sort of tropes and homages. I mean, you've got the Death Star, which you could kind of double as like a castle. You've got the princess who's locked up in the dungeon, so to speak, and you've got the ragtag band of heroes, scrapping along trying to save her. You've got the old wizard character. There's all those great motifs and characters that are found in fairy tales and mythology, and George Lucas found such a unique way to package it all together in a way it's futuristic because it's set in space, but yet the story is universal. And I think that's what makes this particular film that much more appealing and why it's beloved all these years later, because the story is so accepted. Like it's the classic hero's journey, like I mentioned, but it's it's such a it's such a small movie in a lot of ways, and I don't mean that in a negative way. But when you look at obviously what Star Wars is now, and certainly what came in the with the other two films in the trilogy, it's actually a very confined film. There's not a lot of sets. Like I mean, it's big in terms of its scope, but it's not massive like Jedi or The Empire Strikes Back. You've got the Death Star, you've got Tatooine, and you've got the inside of the Falcon. Like that's pretty much it. Like sort of the big elaborate moments are like, the cantina scene or, once they get, inside the Death Star or like in the trash compactor. But like it's not a lot of, big, other worlds and whatnot. And, again, a lot of that was budgetary issues and things like that. But it's so amazing for what kind of all the strikes that the film had going for it, because I mean nobody I think thought this movie was going to be a success. I don't think George Lucas thought it was going to be a success, and yet it connects with an audience because again I think the story is so universal. It's there's only so many stories, so to speak, and this is just a unique and fresh way to tell those old tales, but kind of give it a modern sensibility and sort of new packaging. But I mean, again, how can you criticize this film? Like you can't. Like I mean, even if you watch it in its original format, which I mean, I know those are those are hard to come by these days unless you've got one of the rare DVDs or the old VHS tapes. But even all these years later, like just from a technological standpoint, it's it's amazing what they accomplished in 1977. And like I said, even if you watch it in that original version, it still manages to hold up. Like it's just so well made and done. And I always like to every so often revisit this film in its original format and just sort of see what it is like, without all of the special edition features and remasters and whatnot. And even though you might be so used to seeing how it looks today because all you see are the special editions, it's still Star Wars. Like, even when like the lightsaber coloring, changes and it's like just like a white blade for a moment during the Vader Kenobi showdown, it still feels like Star Wars. And I'll just say one more thing in terms of world building, because a lot of times these movies will sort of go all about the visuals and then forget to actually set up the world. This film does that, even though, like I said, we're only on a few locations. There is a sense of a much larger galaxy and story going on out there. And I think my favorite scene in this entire film is when Obi-Wan is sort of telling Luke, quote unquote, the truth about his father. And again, it's hats off to Alec Guinness, a masterclass Academy Award winning actor who was able to, with just a few lines of dialogue and no sense of backstory or what would follow 20, 30, 40 years down the road, is able to say and convey what the entire franchise would be about. And again, just the way things ultimately get paid off in later films and certainly the prequels, it all goes back to that little scene in Obi-Wan's his hut. And I know I just that is the one scene, like, I mean, I'll just like, go on YouTube randomly and like just find that whole scene because it's just such a masterclass in world building and exposition. And Alec Guinness just makes it look easy. Like he sets up the entire prequels and what's ultimately to come with just a few lines of dialogue, and it all works. Like, the whole certain point of view payoff that happens later on, it all works so well. Again, I could go on a great length about this film, but I'll stop if you wanna jump in.
For sure. You hit the nail on the head in terms of what they were able to accomplish with the budget and how you hit it perfectly. The show, usually movies show, don't tell, but they were able to flip that in such a way because of the budgetary reasons. And with, there wasn't an exposition dump. Alec Guinness and Obi-Wan, it wasn't like, one of those scenes where it's like, this is obviously they're doing this because they can't show us, so they have to tell us. It fits so perfectly, and those lines are delivered so expertly, so you get that grand sense of this huge galaxy, and you sense that, old Ben Kenobi, he's seen some shit, he's been through some shit, and that's kudos to Alec Guinness for sure, and kudos to George Lucas. Like you said, it's a smaller in scale in terms of the locations and everywhere we go, but it doesn't feel that way. And you have to consciously be thinking about that and looking for that to really notice. Really, I mean, that's the beauty of that film for sure. So yeah, I'm going to get into that when I get further up on my ranking. But for now, we will get to number three. We're in our top three, man. We're getting
We're
close.
getting very close now.
Yeah. So number three, and this is fitting, is episode three, Revenge of the Sith. So
Very nice. Very
top
nice.
three, top three movie, man. Yeah. I mean, what can I say? I'm a prequel kid. This was just, I'm a villain guy. Darth Vader is my favorite villain of all time. Horror, not horror, just in cinema history, he is the GOAT. And this movie is just special. It is special. Let's just start with that incredible opening sequence. That opening sequence is amazing. Them rescuing,
One of the
Palps
best.
is one of the best. It's so cool. Uh, Hayden Christensen, I talked about him in Attack of the Clones. He is, dare I say, phenomenal in this film. I think he is really misinterpreted in terms of some of the fandom. I think he portrayed Anakin in such a way that was just has aged so beautifully for me, and it makes sense so much. Ian McDermott is amazing. You talked about him, and I know he's one of your favorites. You gush about him. I kind of feel you feel the same way about him as you do as Loomis in the Halloween franchise. He's kind of just that guy you always go to. You know,
Yeah.
is
Oh
that a
yeah.
fair
No,
comparison?
I there's just something about Ian
Yeah,
McDermott in these movies. Like no, actually the Loomis comparison is particularly good. Yeah, no.
yeah, I've gotten that sense from you, but yeah, he is incredible. Of course, some of his lines. I mean, obviously, you can get into some of his quotable lines with Darth Plagueis and all
Oh.
that. It's just incredible. Well, we won't get into that,
No.
but you know, there are a lot of what you could call plot holes. A lot of people call plot holes, you know, the entire plan of the Jedi. But to me, it's like while they may be plot holes per se, it's not really, because the Jedi were in such disarray and they were so blind and comfortable by this point that a lot of it makes sense in terms of where the story is going. Um, you know, everyone talks about the Jedi, how they handled Anakin, and you know, spying on Senator Palpatine because he's friends with him, and you know, that was handled poorly. But as poorly it was handled, and I've never heard someone talk about this. Kudos and credit to Anakin, because he still comes forth and tells Windu and tells the Jedi that we have a Sith Lord. I mean, he is the chosen one because of that. I mean, he is in front of a Sith Lord and is being entrusted by the Jedi to be alone with the Sith Lord. They don't know he's a Sith Lord, of course, but now we know how much influence Palpatine, or we should call him Darth Sidious at this point, has on people face to face, and how manipulative he can be. So the fact that he is sinking his claws into Anakin, and Anakin still goes to the Jedi with that information, is really a testament to how strong Anakin is. People, you know, complain that Anakin is like, oh, his turn is too quick, but dude, after all of that and the Jedi fucking up so badly, Anakin still does the right thing. And of course, you know, we could talk about the scene and how Windu, you know, Windu just hates Anakin. I feel like he just has a bone to pick with him. He's like, you will have earned my trust if this is true. Like, come on, dude. Like, that was so poorly done on Windu's part, but whatever. I mean, it had to be explained somehow, Anakin,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, credit to George Lucas for writing that, and in such a beautiful way. You know, Order 66 is iconic. I will always remember seeing that for the first time in theaters. All those poor Jedi just in the middle of the Clone Wars, just getting betrayed. And yeah, obviously, you know, it's been memed to death, you know, Anakin going back to the temple and, you know, killing the younglings. And then I'll get into my favorite part, which is obviously Yoda versus Sidious and Obi-Wan versus Anakin. I mean, talk about peak Star Wars. This is one of the peak moments. I can quote the entire scene between Obi-Wan, as many people can that are prequel lovers. The entire scene between Obi-Wan and Anakin. You know, it is just Ewan McGregor sells it so
He
beautifully.
does.
It every time it feels like it's gonna be too over the top, it's not, and it just fits so well, and it's I love it. I have such a good time with it so much. So it is such a good time, and that is such an amazing payoff, seeing two, well, one Jedi and one fallen Jedi pretty much at their peak, you know, going at it, and the choreograph
Oh,
fight. I forget who choreographed the fight. I
Nick
forget his
Gillard.
name. Yes, Nick Gillard. He, I mean, give him his flowers, because
Oh,
that, I mean, it isn't my personal favorite fight. It's probably my second favorite. But in terms of the choreography, it's number one for sure. I mean,
that's
it's
amazing.
just so beautiful, and it's so long and extended. Yoda versus Sidious, like I said, I have a little bit of an issue with Yoda. I have a bone to pick with Yoda. The fact that he just kind of crawls away and escapes. It's like, dude, you have Sidious right where you want him. I know you kind of like fall down into the shaft, or but like, can you get back up and chase him, please? Like he's right there. You're never gonna have a better moment to kill him. He's a Dark Lord of the Sith. So I thought that was kind of strange choice, but whatever. I mean, it's still a cool moment. But yeah, I love this movie. It's top three for me. It's amazing. It's so fun to watch. To this day, and Anakin's downfall is part of what makes Vader the most interesting and the best villain of all time, for sure, for me.
Well said. I co-sign everything you said there because this film, dear God, again, we're getting into like a very razor thin territory
Yes.
for me. So like pretty much any of these three films, I could make an argument depending on which day of the week it is for one, two, and three. But I will keep with my ranking though. Again, this time next week it'll probably change. Number three for me is also
Okay,
Revenge of the
cool.
Sith. So very fitting on that. This was this film I mentioned earlier, I saw an unhealthy amount of times in the summer of 2005. I had loved the other two films before, obviously growing up with the original trilogy, but this film, talk about the perfect Star Wars film. I mean, it delivers everything you'd want in a movie and then some. I mean, right off the bat, that opening, it's probably the best opening of any Star Wars film, I think. Just the scope of the battle and then what it leads into. I mean, we get our first of five lightsaber fights in a Star Wars movie. I mean, that's incredible. Like not even any of the later films in the Disney canon could top that. Like I mean, there's so much action in this film. It's almost a little nuts. But then at the same time, there's such a rich story going on here. It's the most emotional of the prequels. I mean, I could honestly understand if someone said it's the most emotional of the entire saga because just
Oh yeah.
the downfall of Anakin is it's a masterful uh, deconstruction of a character. I mean, and I just love the little moments that appear even early on in the film, like when Sidious and or Palpatine and Anakin are walking in his office, and it's like a mirror image of how they walk in Return of the Jedi. I love those little callbacks in this film, and certainly there's moments in the other two, but it's on full display in this film, and you said it, the turn of Anakin, I think, is handled so well, and it's layered because we see the seeds of it planted in the last film with his fear of losing his mother, who of course he does, and that now has manifested itself into the potential loss of his wife and maybe his unborn child. So you then couple that with his own insecurities, his own quest for recognition, and the little seeds of doubt that Palpatine puts in there throughout all of their interactions. It's just such a charming and frankly frightening uh, bit of manipulation. Like it's kind of unreal how heavy things get in this film. I mean, there's a reason why it was the first PG-13 Star Wars film. And I mean, I can remember at the time, like seeing magazine articles and things in the newspaper and even on TV of people saying, "Oh, talking heads, oh God, this movie is going to be too violent. It's not good for kids. You've got heads coming off in the first 5 minutes or something." And it's like it's a dark story. This is not a simple feel good story. This is the destruction of the Republic. This is the rise of a dictator. You've got the fall of a hero. It's emotional, it's brutal, it's raw, but yet it still manages to be a Star Wars film. I was just so transfixed by this film the first time I saw it, and the many times more I saw it afterwards. It has everything going for it. It's fun, it's exciting, it has a deeply complex story. It really pulls on your heartstrings. I mean that moment in the office where Anakin finally makes that decision. Like even though I've seen this film dozens and dozens of times, I still watch it and I think, oh God, maybe he'll do the right thing. This you're just so caught up in the story. You're like it's still the same gut punch when Anakin makes that deal with the devil, and it's again, it's just so it's handled so well and in a lot of ways effortlessly. Like it's not overdone. Like it's a lot of it's in the nuance and again scenes like at the opera with the whole Darth Plagueis line, which again now has become meme central and whatnot. But like that's really a great bit of dialogue. And again, to anyone that criticizes the dialogue in the prequels, like Exhibit A, like this is really good stuff here, folks. Like so, you can have that. But I mean, I don't know, it just like General Grievous as just an aside. Like I remember watching that and being like, who the fuck is this? Like this is unbelievable. Like he's got like the arms coming out and he's got the lightsabers and I mean just even like on a thematic level, it's I love how it sort of represents Anakin's eventual turn. Like you have Dooku on the one hand who is the fallen Jedi, and on the other hand you have Grievous who is this mechanical being. So kind of a nice representation of what Anakin's future is going to be. And I mean, again, I love that scene at the beginning, which again, this has a similar callback to Return of the Jedi, but with everything being reversed and Anakin doing what Luke didn't do, which is give in to his feelings and listen to the Emperor. I again, there's just so much in this movie, and you can rewatch it again dozens of times like I have, and you can still pick up new and exciting moments. Like, I mean, I just noticed it on a most recent rewatch where when Palpatine confronts or reveals his identity to Anakin and he pulls out the lightsaber. If you look quickly and you pause it at the right time, you can see Sidious is moving his arm to almost bring his lightsaber into grip. And again, he doesn't do it, but it's little moments like that that just sort of add to the excitement and just the overall pleasure in watching this film because there's a lot of moments like that are sort of peppered throughout the film. And I mean, again, it was at the time the last Star Wars film, so it really did feel like a perfect conclusion to the prequels and tying together the original trilogy. And of course, it ends with that iconic shot of Luke arriving on Tatooine and just Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru looking off at the sunset. It's Star Wars. Like it all feels perfect, but yet it also delivers something that we hadn't seen before. I mean, it's a dark story. It's not an unforgiving film, and George Lucas doesn't cut corners or pull any punches. He delivers a resounding conclusion to his saga, and I mean we're better off because of it. I love how people continue to discover this film and cite this film as one of their favorites, if not their favorite of the prequels and of the whole Star Wars saga because I mean to me like there's a lot of peak Star Wars. You said it best. I mean, we get to see Yoda fight the Emperor. Like I, I remember not knowing like yeah, I tried to keep myself in the dark for this film going into it. And when that moment happened, I was like, okay, first of all, I didn't know I needed that in my life, but there we go. Like my nitpick and I'll agree with you. I think there needed to be another scene why Yoda decided to run. And I've read some of the novels and there's more exposition, but like, I try not to think of that as canon necessarily. But my only other real issue with that, I wanted more of that scene. Like that was just an incredible moment. It's one of my favorite lightsaber battles in the entire saga. But yeah, I mean the Obi-Wan Anakin stuff. I mean, again, every time again, it's like with the Mace Windu scene, like I even though I've seen it dozens of times, I keep thinking, oh, maybe this time it'll be different. Like maybe Anakin will see the light, or they'll find a way to team up together. Like you just get so caught up in this story, and it's a movie that makes me remember why I love Star Wars in the first place. This film is I mean, I had loved it before, but this film just took it to a whole other level for me. And again, it's you can rewatch it and find something new from it each and every time. So Yeah, episode three. God willing, they'll re-release it next year for the anniversary. I have my fingers crossed on that one because I'd love to see this another time in the on the big screen because it's just it's what I think of when I think of going to see a Star Wars movie. It's just the hype and the energy, and then just the the adrenaline and sort of the quiet contemplation at the same time at the end of the film because it is so heavy, but there is of course the payoff of where it is going to go.
I can't wait when that comes back to theaters. I mean, they're definitely going to do that. That's
Yeah,
going
it
to be
has to
incredible.
be.
But yeah, just to another shameless plug for my podcast, Never Split Up. We do a fun segment where we pick a never split up moment, we call it, from our horror movies where characters make dumb decisions, and we have our fans vote on it. My never split up moment for episode 3. You talk about the Yoda scene, fleeing. It's really
Ah,
before that happens. It's when Yoda and Obi-Wan decide to split up, and I yell at the screen every single time. But it makes sense because again, the hubris of the Jedi in this movie,
yeah.
even still, they see what happens at the temple. Order 66 happens. They're still confident enough to where they think they can just split up. I mean, they should have handled Sidious together. Anakin was off going, flying off, doing his own thing. They could have gotten him to him later.
Hmm.
It bothers me, but it doesn't really bother me. It's just one of those moments where I'm like, guys, stick together, like
Don't
defeat him
split up.
now. You're right there, defeat him now, and then go take on Anakin together. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. It's funny. I always yell at the screen. I call it, the never split up moment for that movie. So yeah. And then you talk about all the layers of this movie for sure. One of the things that I picked up on recently in this film, because I was thinking, why do some people have such a problem with the dialogue, in particular, you know, Palpatine and Sidious,
Apples, bay.
and his portrayal of Sidious and his lines? And I think I figured it out because on the surface, when you're watching this surface level, and we're at the point now, we're super nerds with these
Oh,
franchises, so we're
yeah.
not watching this on the surface anymore. And I think this is
No.
why we get it more. And I hate to say, like, oh, you don't get it, but I think the people that have issue with it don't realize that he is a dark lord of the Sith. And to us watching the movie, it seems over the top. But to the people, especially Anakin sitting next to him, that's like his Jedi mind trick. It's
Yeah.
he is just oozing evil, but you don't see it when you're with him. We can see it because we're watching the movie, but Anakin can't see it because he's being manipulated at all times. That's how powerful Sidious is. And I just think it's brilliant. I think it was definitely intentional,
Oh,
those
yeah.
the delivery of those lines. And I just, it bothers me when people have issue with it because it's like you don't understand thematically why it is that it is. And I just wanted to highlight that as well. Just beautiful job all the way around for sure.
No, I mean he's meant to be the devil. I mean, and people sort of, think of it as a joke, but like, in terms of like the story, he is the devil incarnate. And the devil's, greatest trick is to show to the world he didn't exist. And it's
Mhm.
it's all right there. I mean, it's
Yeah.
yeah, I could co-sign
And he's so
100%.
obvious with his delivery because he can be,
Oh
because
yeah,
he
he gets
is
away with it.
manipulating, these people in real time. So yeah, okay. All right,
Yeah.
awesome. I'm really happy that it was both in our that
Top three.
was top 3 for you as
Top
well,
three,
right?
yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
cool.
Three for
Okay.
three.
All right, top 2. So my number 2 is going to be episode 4, A New Hope, the OG Star
There
Wars.
we go.
I love this movie. And again, if Phil, you know this, you listen to my podcast, I am a sucker for original entries
Mm.
in franchises. I just love going back to the first movie of epic franchises and seeing where all of this world building starts and begins. I, I am so grateful for George Lucas. I mean, we both are, of course, but having all of these seeds planted in this movie, I mean, it's not all of them, but it's a lot of them, because you don't get Yoda yet, but you get a lot of what we know is Star Wars comes from
Mhm.
this movie, and the fact that it was like in one person's mind is just so
Amazing.
incredible to me. I still think this movie holds up to this day. We talked about it before. You were talking about it. I don't know why this movie gets. I feel like it's getting more harshly critiqued in terms of the original trilogy more than
Mm,
Empire and Return. I've seen
I've
people
noticed that.
rank it a little bit lower, and I just feel like it gets a little. I don't know why. I think people are trying to be different, and they're like, "Oh, the original is doesn't age well." I totally disagree. There's a reason why we're talking about this movie, in 2024, and we're talking about this franchise, and it all starts with A New Hope and the craze that happened when this movie released. I mean, we could talk about the box office numbers and just how it just took hold of society when it was released, and it was a really good reason for it. Like you said, nothing had really ever been done like this before. um it's got, again, it's just introducing everything. It's got Darth Vader, the introduction of Darth Vader. um what Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The X-Wing, my
Mm.
favorite ship of all time. I always wanted to own an X-Wing when I was a kid. So cool. Just amazing. I think Luke blowing up the Death Star is probably the most important movie scene of my young childhood. I mean, seeing that happen, him using the Force, really, I mean, it's called A New Hope. It gave me so much hope as a little kid that like anything's possible, not to get too, you know, emotional
No,
about it, but
no, no, I know.
it's such an amazing moment. And really everything that you said, the fact that he was able to create this grand galaxy far, far away with this limited budget and using, it's a shame. It really is a shame that it's so hard to find the original copies of this movie. But if you can somehow find an original version of this movie, guys, I definitely implore you to watch it, because just seeing how he made this movie practically is just incredible. It is such a great movie. It's my favorite. We didn't really touch on her, but it's my favorite Leia in any
Oh,
Star
wow.
Wars. Um, you're a little short for a stormtrooper. She's so sassy in this movie. I love her. Princess Leia is awesome. Han is great. All the characters are great. It is great. I love this movie so much. It's number two. Normally, it would be number one in any other franchise when something is this good. That's a number one. But it's not. But it's number two, which is pretty high up there. So yeah, I love this movie.
No, that's not a bad place to put that film. And I mean, you said it best. It started it all. It's the reason we're still talking about Star Wars to this day. I mean, it's you can't even begin to wrap your mind around a world without Star Wars. Like it just it's so part of the culture. And this movie is probably 99.9% the reason why it had such an impact and still continues to have an impact. And I'm with you. I don't understand why people are ranking this film in such a low degree lately. I mean, I guess everyone likes to be different. I don't know what.
Yeah,
It's just
I don't get it.
bizarre to me because I mean this, you know, even just putting aside the rest of the saga, like it is a perfect film. Like
Yep.
this is how you make a movie. It's all right there. It doesn't leave anything open-ended for part two, part three. Like it's a self-contained story, and it's just a lot of fun. It's just a fun movie. And again, we could spend an entire podcast just talking about that particular movie, which we may have to do at some point down the road. All right, so these for me, this is where we're really getting into splitting hairs here. I mean, we're right on the lightsaber's edge. I mean, it's I could make an argument for either one of these films being number one and number two, but ultimately, a personal stake will dictate what is number one. So, number two for me is The Empire Strikes Back, and again, this is a knife's edge, folks. But let me just start off by saying, and I'm curious your thought. I think I know the answer, but I want to hear what you have to say. I think bar none, again, we can get into favorites and whatnot. This is still the best made Star Wars sequel. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we're in
Yeah.
agree. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I said a moment ago,
The
99.
reason we haven't talked about this movie yet, and we're
Yeah.
now over 2 hours
Yeah.
in, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. 99.9% of the reason we talk about Star Wars is A New Hope. But if this film had not worked, the franchise is over.
Yep.
This movie is why Star Wars is a franchise today. Talk about expanding the story, talk about taking it in a new direction. You want to go back to subverting expectations. I mean, this movie is, if you thought it was going to be a repeat of A New Hope, you're going to be sorely mistaken because this is a totally different story. It pushes the characters in new ways. It has the greatest plot twist reveal of any movie of all time. I am your father. You don't get any better than that moment here. And again, I said you mentioned would love to have seen seen Star Wars in 1977. I would have loved to have been in the theater in 1980 and seen that moment for the first time because certainly when I was introduced to Star Wars, like it was everywhere, and so you couldn't help but stumble into the fact that Darth Vader was Luke's father. I mean, it's still an incredible moment, but I would love to just have experienced that without sort of the knowledge of Star Wars in and around me. But even all of that aside, it's just such a phenomenal film. There are no notes that I have with this film. It's perfect from start to finish, and it is damn bold. I mean, it ends on a cliffhanger. Yes, there's sort of uh, an optimistic ending of okay, maybe they'll find Han and oh, look, Luke got a new hand. But I mean, this is not a happy ending. Like episode 4, they blow up the Death Star, everybody gets medals. I mean, in this one, Luke barely survives. Han is put in carbonite. Oh, and did I mention Darth Vader is Luke's father? I mean, in the same way episode 3, like I have a hard time seeing a studio making that film. I don't know how a studio would even make a film like this today. I mean, it's certainly been done, to an extent, but just the boldness of this movie. I mean, again, even just the character of Yoda. I mean, a 2.5 foot puppet character. I mean, even George Lucas is on the record saying if he hadn't worked, the whole movie could have fallen apart. But I mean, again, that's a testament to I think Hamill's believability in Yoda, not as a puppet, but as a real character in the story. And of course, Frank Oz. I mean, he is the man behind Yoda, whether operating the puppet and doing the voice or just the voice like in some of the prequel films. It's just such an immersive story. I mentioned earlier about how it gives the best explanation of the Force. I mean, just the scenes on Dagobah. I mean, there's so much nuance and depth to the entire journey Luke goes on. And again, I love the progression of Luke's character because he certainly gets a character arc in A New Hope, but we get to see the expansion on that. And I love that he's tested in this film. Luke fails across the board. He has to be rescued by Han. His snow speeder gets shot down. He struggles with his training on Dagobah. He tries to fight Vader. He loses his hand. I mean, it's again, I can't imagine a movie today constantly willing to show the hero falling and falling. And again, Luke does not win. He gets saved because of his friends. He goes there to try and rescue them, and irony of irony, they have to rescue him. I love how it pushes the characters in this way. I love how it expands what we know of the Force. Uh, Yoda is one of the greatest characters ever created in any film, in any story. I just love that the 2.5 foot tall frog-like creature is like the wisest and most powerful Jedi in the galaxy. I just think that was such a genius maneuver because you could have easily just done another Obi-Wan like
Oh yeah.
character, but it
Imagine
was
going to a studio with that nowadays,
oh no, they'd be
and
like,
trying to
oh,
present that.
oh, they'd
Yeah.
be like, oh God, no, that's weird. What? Two and a half, and he talks funny. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could just
Yeah.
see people losing their minds over that. But It's it's a perfect film. I mean, Darth Vader. This is Vader's scariest film, and I would even probably argue it's the best Vader film because it's more than just a villain movie. I mean, he is certainly the great bad guy in this movie. I mean, he's force choking everybody left and right and whatnot, but it is so much more complex than that. I mean, I love the end of the film where they think they're going to get them in the tractor beam, and of course, the Admiral Piet has reassured Vader, no, 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 we deactivated the hyperdrive, and then they escape, and there's like that close up of Piet, and you think, oh God, he's going to get it, and Vader looks at him, he looks out the window, and he walks away. It's such a great moment because again, I feel like today, I'm not trying to like pick on modern movies, but I feel like you would have had Vader kill him right there, and it would have been, oh, one of those crowd pleasing moments. But the movie goes deeper than that, and you start to see what's actually going on behind the mask and what's going on with Vader's soul. I mean, it's such a interesting movie, and it really is about Luke and Vader. I mean, I know there's all the other stuff going on with Han and Leia and the stuff on Cloud City. But the movie, it's about Luke and Vader. I mean, this movie sets up the central premise of the entire saga of it being a story of father and son and ultimately a redemptive story. I mean, all the seeds are planted in this film, but it's just it's majestic. It's an immaculate film, and there has there has never been a Star Wars sequel that has matched it in terms of what Empire was able to accomplish. I mean, it's a flawless film, and like I said, if this movie hadn't worked, that'd have been the end of Star Wars. And I got to give a lot of credit where credit is due because director Irvin Kershner was. I mean, George is there on his mountain because I mean he created it, but outside of George Lucas, I think the most important sort of visionary was Irvin Kershner because a lot of the stuff that was done in this film is a credit to him. I mean, the famous Han Leia exchange, "I love you, I know," like in the original script it was "I love you too." Like again, Harrison Ford working with Irvin Kershner and getting take after take. I mean, it cost a shitload of money and all of that, but I mean, it was worth it in the end because he was willing to push it and take what was on the page and say, all right, let's try it out. Let's try something different. And I mean, the film speaks for itself. And so it had everything going for it. And I mean, to say nothing of the iconic Imperial March, which is introduced in this film. And
Yeah.
it's just, again, you could do a whole podcast on these three films and there still wouldn't be enough time. It's just, again, the depth of it. We go to so many different worlds. I mean, Cloud City on Bespin. That was another place as a kid. Like I wanted to go there. I thought that was just such a cool, just visually different universe than what we had seen in the previous movie. I mean, to say nothing of Hoth, the ice planet. I mean, that was cool and different. And again, like right at the top, Luke gets injured. Like just the movie sets you up in a way that you literally don't know what is going to happen. And of course, it all has that tremendous payoff with the Vader reveal at the end. But uh, just just a beautiful film, and I know you have more to say on this. So I want you to take it away on it.
Yeah. No, that was beautifully said. I agree with everything you said. You asked me, is this the greatest Star Wars sequel? It's the greatest sequel in cinema history for me personally. And guys, this is my number one. So we're at our number one now. Empire Strikes Back is my number one. It, in terms of how much pressure was on them to deliver a sequel to A New Hope. I talked about the craze. I mean, you can look at footage back then, news footage of people just lining up at the cinemas to see A New Hope 10, 20 times. Just an instant success and having to top that and just succeeding in almost every way. Like you said, it's grander in scope, We go to new places we've never seen before. Um, and it's ballsy. It is This movie is still studied to this day. I mean, he has such a huge impact. Dude, after A New Hope, we have the medal ceremony and the good guys win. And then this is such a gut punch. The bad guys win.
Yeah.
I mean, seeing this movie as a formative youth and like was a gut punch to me. Not only is it a gut punch to our heroes and Luke, but I'm like, wait, what? By the end of the movie, you're relieved because the heroes don't die. Like to the viewer, that's a victory for us. But that is such a turn from what we got in New Hope, where it's we're blowing up Death Stars and we're having ceremonies. Now it's like, holy shit, can we survive this? Oh, just impeccable, beautiful storytelling. Like you said, this is Vader's movie. This is what cements Vader as the greatest villain of all time. Um, David Prowse, his movements in this movie are just chef's kiss. And we didn't talk about James Earl Jones, who is legendary in his own right, but the combination of those two guys to bring Vader to life is just incredible. It's perfect, no notes whatsoever. I'm really glad you highlighted the scene at the end where Vader is looking out on the Millennium Falcon and they get the hyperdrive working. That scene, that is my favorite Vader moment in any Star Wars, is when they shoot off into light speed and he does the double look, the double take. He starts to turn and then he looks back out the window. It's so subtle, but it's so beautiful. And again, kudos to David Prowse and the direction. It's so amazing. I love that scene, and you could tell his officers are just waiting, pretty much waiting to die. They're like, "Oh shit! Like this is it." Tell my loved ones, I love them. But no, he just walks off. It's such a great moment, and that is definitely highlight for me. I think their tackling of Luke and how it's not, like you said, it's not a linear progression for him. He has his hero's moment in A New Hope, and now you see a Luke that you said not only is failing, but he's tackling his anger issues when he's on Dagobah and he's going through those trials with Yoda. He's got a lot of issues he's got to work through. He's very impatient, which Yoda tries to instill patience in him. I mean, you see him, he's like, I gotta go save my friends. I'm not wasting any more time here. So you get those layers to Luke, which is what makes Luke in Return of the Jedi. I said that's my favorite Luke, but really this movie sets the stage for that. And people don't talk about Luke pre his confrontation with Vader in this movie enough. I think Mark Hamill was phenomenal in this movie. It's just a perfect movie. It's like I said, you're on the edge of your seat when Vader. So I said that Revenge of the Sith's lightsaber duel was my second favorite. This is bar none my favorite duel between Vader and Luke in the entire saga. Talk about just imposing and menacing. I mean, Vader is just playing with Luke and his style. He is just overpowering him. I get goosebumps every time I watch it. Still, it's so well done, the choreograph for this, and it's because it's not the high flying lightsaber spectacle, and it
No.
shouldn't have been. We get that in the prequels, but this is an older Vader. I mean, you see him when he's unmasked later on. He's an older Vader. He's not at his peak, and this is a Luke that is severely, severely undertrained. He's not even. I wouldn't even consider him a Jedi Knight. He's barely a Padawan at this point, and the way Vader just toys with him and that whole sequence. Again, I go back to my horror movie loving roots. Super creepy, some of those shots in the Death Star and stuff. So cool. What was I gonna say? Oh yes, the Leia and Han with what why is his name Calrissian.
Okay,
Sorry.
the
Yeah,
Lando.
Lando. Sorry, I was going to say Caldo. I was getting the two names confused. That was shocking. Holy shit. What a
I
ballsy
know.
move for them to go in that direction. That scene where you see Vader sitting there at the
Uh,
table. I mean, it's so iconic. It's so great. I love it so much. And you touched on it. The "I love you, I know" scene is just cemented in movie history. And the fact that it was improv in the moment is just incredible. I am so grateful, as grateful as I am for A New Hope. Like you said, I am just as equally grateful for this movie because we wouldn't get the franchise without the amazing sequel. So kudos to everyone involved. I know they had their issues filming this movie. I believe the original budget was around $8 million, and it bloated up to like 30 something million.
yeah.
So thank God they stuck with it and they didn't let executives get in. And George funded this, and for the most part, I believe, and he
Mhm.
did what he wanted to do and told what he wanted to tell. I am so forever thankful for this movie. Like you said, I have no notes, I have no nitpicks. It is a perfect movie. It's my favorite sequel of all time, and I don't get why people don't have this in at least their top three. I know we've been talking a little bit about like the fandom, but and I get people grow up with different versions and different prequels and sequels, but man, dude, the filmmaking, it just
Just from a filmmaking standpoint,
exactly. Yeah.
it's perfect. Like there's a reason why this movie is studied even more so than the original film because it's
Oh yeah.
just in terms of how to do a narrative, how to world build, how to subvert expectations. I mean, even just again, the cinematography, like there's so much to this film that again, just from being a lover of cinema, you can't help but appreciate this film. And there's a reason why it's the template for sequels in the modern day. I mean, every sequel, whether it's Terminator 2, Spider-Man 2, even The Dark Knight, they will all either pay homage or follow to an extent the playbook of this film because this movie showed everybody how to do it. And particularly in a world at the time where sequels were not the common thing, like again, more props to this movie.
Yeah, for sure.
No,
Definitely.
absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. Again, could do a whole episode and a half just on this one movie
Yeah.
with every single scene. Just love it. Absolutely love it. Well, that of course brings me to my number one, and that probably you all can guess at this point. It is Return of the Jedi, and as evidenced by the original VHS tape right here. This is the Star Wars film that I rewatched the most growing up. So I have that pre-baked nostalgia for it. I wore out the VCR playing this film again and again. This was the movie that I was reenacting with lightsaber fights and my Star Wars action figure. Like it was always going back to Return of the Jedi. And I think because there's so much going on in this film. It's tying up the original trilogy, and of course, it's tying up later on the entire saga. But just from the standpoint of it being the final film in that trilogy, it accomplishes so much. And, you know, it, it, I never felt like it played it safe. I think there's a lot of bold decisions with this film. I mean, again, you're bringing in another bad guy, essentially, the ultimate bad guy in the Emperor, who before this we had just met briefly in a hologram. And to bring in this character in the third film without a lot of exposition or even necessarily full setup, it works tremendously well. And I think that's again a hat tip to Ian McDiarmid, but it sort of has the charm of the original film. Like there's that element of fun, particularly or adventure, even when they're rescuing Han from Jabba the Hutt. Which I mean, first off, talk about a great reveal for Jabba the Hutt, a character that's built up over the course of three movies. I mean, I know now, of course, he's in the special edition of Episode 4, but I mean, at the time, no one knew what Jabba looked like, and to see this slug like behemoth. I mean, it's just again props to George for creating a character like Jabba the Hutt because the payoff is definitely worth it. And I always love that whole, first 20 minutes or so of the film where they're rescuing Han. And it's I know it just feels to me like Star Wars. Like it just everything kind of builds, moment by moment, with Leia arriving and Chewie and then Luke arriving. And I love the progression of Luke. And I'm gonna stay on Luke for much of it because Luke is the central figure of this entire film. And it's my favorite performance of Mark Hamill without question. I love the layered performance that he brings to Luke in this one because Luke is fully established. He has become the Jedi Knight. I mean, he announces himself as a Jedi Knight in this film, and he's confident, but not in an arrogant way. Like he really has become, a fully fledged Jedi Knight. Like, this is no longer the impulsive kid. He's learned from his mistakes. He's come to terms with who he is, where he comes from, and he's trying to figure out a solution. And I love how Luke is always going against what his elders are telling him in this movie. I mean, both Obi-Wan and Yoda are pretty much saying, you've got to go kill your father. I mean, they're not saying, that explicitly, but basically, you've got to go defeat him because there's no other way to stop this. You have to defeat him. That's how it's going to end. And Luke is like, no, no, I'm not going to do that. And then, of course, you bring in the Emperor who's like goading him, kill your father, kill your father. And so it all sort of ties back into Luke's central thesis that, like, no, there's got to be something more here than, me just, killing my father. Like that isn't going to solve anything. And I love how Luke shows what a Jedi Knight can be in this film. It's more than just, brute force or strength with a lightsaber. Like that scene, it is probably the best moment of the entire saga where Luke stands down the Emperor and throws his lightsaber over there and again proclaims himself, "Oh, I'm a Jedi like my father before me." I mean, I get chills every time I watch that moment because it's to me the whole essence of Star Wars. It's what a Jedi Knight is supposed to be. It's, staring down fear and not showing any temptation. It's a wonderful moment. And again, of course, opposite Ian McDiarmid, who just plays it with twisted relish and the way he just, has to like utter the word Jedi. Like there's just so much contempt and anger. And again, it all ties together so perfectly when you watch the other three films. But again, I have to give a hat tip for Ian McDiarmid. Like with just a few simple lines, he can convey so much history and world building with again just you might think at the time a throwaway line, but it's so much more than that. And it just everything ties together with this film. I know Star Wars has gone on and it will continue to go on probably long after we're gone. But to me, this will always hold a special place in my heart as the definitive end. Like it really does tie together the original trilogy. It ties together the prequels, and it gives us a quote unquote happy ending. I mean, it it's perfection. I mean, I love reading the behind the scenes stuff of this film where there was a lot of push to have George go with a more somber or, even more depressing ending. And I think, maybe he was thinking of, toy sales on the one hand, but like I think you would not have had the same staying power with Star Wars if this had been a more melancholy ending. Like it's triumphant. The good guys win, but there's also that piece of Luke, kind of putting the past to rest, if you will. He's come to peace with his father. His father has been redeemed. It's a beautiful, optimistic ending that just sort of projects the whole idea of what Star Wars is about, which is, it's about hope. It's about never giving up. It's about your family and finding togetherness either in a found family or even in a family that may have been estranged from, as was the case with Luke. But it's just such it's a feel good film, but it's also a rousing and special film. Again, I love this film to the end. Like it just it to me, this is quintessential Star Wars, and I think because I grew up with it so much and it was always on repeat viewing for me, it holds that special place. But the job it does of tying together all the threads from Empire and yet still managing to deliver something that is satisfying. I mean, you said it best. The third act is one of the best in any Star Wars film. I mean, just that showdown with Luke and Vader and the Emperor. I mean, to me, that whole fight and exchange is my favorite of anything in the saga. I just love how it is so complex, and again, it ends with that great moment of Vader's or Anakin's redemption, I should say. And again, I could do a whole dissection on just that whole moment, but it's perfect. I mean, again, does it have some flaws? Sure, sure, but at the end of it, it delivers what I want out of a Star Wars film, which is action, adventure, and that sense of family and hope. So yeah, Return of the Jedi. It's again, it's on a knife's edge. Again, I can make the same case about Empire, but this is one instance where nostalgia definitely influences me a little bit. So I'll make no excuse for that.
No, you're totally right. I mean, every time I watch this movie, it is the perfect ending. And every time I do rewatch this movie, it makes me kind of think, Disney should have went a different direction and not even touched the Skywalkers at all, you know,
Yeah.
um, because it's so fitting and it's so great. I personally, so when I rewatch the first six movies, the original saga, if you will, with the prequels, I do. I don't know what order you watch them in. I do the machete order.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
They call it the machete order. Because you can nix episode one.
Right.
I personally watch episode. I
Yeah.
still watch episode one, but so I watch four and five. You get the reveal of Vader, and then you take it back to the prequels, and you
Yeah.
do the entire prequel watch through, and then you go jump back to Return of the Jedi. And I think watching it that way is the best way, because it really hits home that redemption and stuff. You see the backstory and then you go back to Return. So that's my personal way to watch it, because like you said, I like how it ends. I think it's a perfect ending. I understand why people watch it in release order too, but I like that the best way. And what's your favorite? My favorite lightsaber of all time is Luke's green lightsaber from Return of the Jedi. I think it's just perfect in
Okay.
every way.
I'm with
Okay.
you. No,
Yeah, I
that
figured as
yeah,
much. Yeah.
I had that one growing up. So
Okay. I
yeah,
think it is so cool. And I really wish that they highlighted it more in the sequels. I wish that instead of the blue saber, Anakin saber, that
same.
Ray would have had the green saber instead. That I think that would have meant more. I understand what they were going with, how it's connected to Vader, and Kylo wants the saber for himself, but it's a little funny when you look at it, and I call it the Youngling Slayer 9000, and Ray is looking at it with this prestige. It's like that's not
It's
doesn't
not
have
that
great
sacred.
history. Yeah, it's not that sacred. I kind of wish that they used the green a little bit more in those sequels. I don't know how you feel about that.
I'm with you. I mean, that was something I was hoping we would have seen in episode 8 was the
Hmm.
return of Luke's green lightsaber. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes that brief moment in the flashback, which, it won't go down that road. But yeah, I'm with you. I think that was a missed opportunity because like when I think of Luke and his lightsaber, it's never the blue. It's
No,
always the green.
I agree. Especially him staring down the First Order, projecting
Bingo.
himself. I've read Rain Johnson's interpretation of why he's using the blue, but I still would have preferred the
Yeah, I
Luke's
don't I
green.
don't quite buy
Yeah,
that actually. Yeah,
yeah.
it's like yeah.
I feel like he thought of that after the fact.
Yeah.
He's like, oh shit, wait a minute. I got to think of a reason. Yeah.
Right. So well said there. Um, well, we did it. We ranked
Whew,
Star Wars. We
man,
we ranked Star Wars. That was
that
that
was a
was
lot.
that was epic. That
It
was
was.
a movie in and of itself.
That was a
But
journey for sure.
Yeah,
Very similar. A lot of similar
no,
picks and
I figured we
rankings.
might have some
Yeah.
overlap, but yeah, especially once you get to the top five,
Yeah. Same top four.
top four. I mean,
We
yeah,
have the same top four. So that is really cool. Really cool to see.
very, very good taste.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, no, if you want to run down your list one
Yeah.
more time,
Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll just run through it
yeah,
as a refresher. So in last place at number 11, I have episode 8, The Last Jedi. At number 10, I have episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And then at number 9, I have episode 9, Rise of Skywalker. At number 8, I have Solo, a Star Wars story. Number 7, episode 2, Attack of the Clones. At number 6, I have Rogue One, a Star Wars story. And my top 5, at number 5, I have episode 7, The Force Awakens. Number 4, I have episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And then my top 3 is episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And then episode 4, A New Hope. And then the number 1 spot, of course, is Empire Strikes Back. I mean, you look around, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the Vader tattoo, the Vader helmet. It's the greatest sequel of all time, and definitely my favorite Star Wars. So, what about you?
God love Darth Vader. I'll just say that. All right, so number 11 is The Rise of Skywalker. Number 10, The Force Awakens. Number 9 is Solo. Number 8 is The Last Jedi. Number 7 is Rogue One. Number 6 is Attack of the Clones. Number 5 is The Phantom Menace. Number 4 is A New Hope. Number 3 is Revenge of the Sith. Number 2 is The Empire Strikes Back. And number 1 is Return of the Jedi, as evidenced by the VHS tape right here in front of you. So
Awesome.
there we go. There we have ranked Star Wars from beginning to end, the entire saga right there. Nolan, want to thank you for making this trek across the galaxy with me. This was a long episode, but nevertheless enjoyable and a good time. So I want to thank you for coming back on the show. Before I let you get out of here, where can people stalk you on social media?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Phil, for having me on. This was a lot of fun. I know this was a long episode, so thanks everyone for tuning in and following along. I want to hear your guys' rankings, so definitely post that. But yeah, you guys can follow me on Twitter/X, whatever people are calling it nowadays, at Movie Nolo. That's my personal account, and then I am on the Never Split Up podcast. You can find us at Never Split Up Pod on Twitter as well as Instagram, and we also have YouTube as well. So if you're watching this on YouTube, and again, congrats, Phil, for making the jump to YouTube. We have a YouTube. Just type in Never Split Up Podcast, and you'll find us there. And you can find us, anywhere on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. So thanks again so much, Phil. This was a really fun time. I can't wait to have you back on our podcast. It's always a pleasure talking to you, all things movies. This was a great time for sure.
No, I had a great time with this, Nolan. I mean that. And again, thank you for coming on the show and look forward to collaborating again in the near future. Certainly, again, we can make this a yearly thing when it comes to talking Star Wars. Next time we could do, just one individual movie and dissect
Yes,
that for three
yes,
hours.
definitely.
So
Oh,
that'll be
yeah.
the agenda for next May the 4th. But everyone, thank you for sticking with us with this episode. Let us know your rankings as well. Drop them in the comments below. Of course, I would appreciate a like and subscribe, help grow this channel here. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, all that information I will leave in the show notes. But that does it for today. Enjoy Star Wars Day, which is tomorrow. The Phantom Menace is playing 25 years later. I know I will be seeing it in theaters, so I'll report back with my reaction. Maybe the ranking will change. Who knows? Like I said, it does. Everything does seem to be in flux. Nevertheless, always in motion is the future. I think, as Yoda says. But on that note, everybody, thank you so much. I'll be back next week, and we will certainly do this all over again for the love of movies.